Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Omni Wizard. In today's episode, we explore what if Superman raised Harry Potter and Hogwarts discovered he was a Kryptonian wizard. Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Boy in the Pod. The Scottish Highlands in October were the kind of beautiful that made you feel small in a good way. Clark Kent had been standing on the ridge for about 20 minutes, watching the last purple light drain out of the sky above Loch Ness, hands in the pockets of his civilian jacket, breathing air that tasted like pine and cold water and nothing else. No sirens, no screaming. No Bruce calling on the comm to tell him about some fresh disaster in the South China Sea. Just wind and heather and the distant complaint of a red deer somewhere in the valley below. He'd needed this. Diana had told him so, and Diana was almost always right about things like that. You don't have to be Superman every hour of every day, Clark, she'd said, in that particular tone she used when she was being kind but also completely serious. Even Kryptonians need to breathe. So here he was, breathing. He'd been at it for 3 days, hiking mostly, or just floating a few inches off the ground when the terrain got boring, letting the wind push him around like he was a leaf and not a man who could crack a mountain if he wanted to. It was the closest thing to peace he'd found in years. The war with Apocalypse had left marks on everyone, and Clark's marks tended to be the kind that didn't show up in medical scans, the kind that lived behind the eyes. He turned to head back toward the small stone cottage he'd rented, thinking about the tin of tomato soup on the shelf and whether that constituted a real dinner when the sky lit up. Not lightning, he knew lightning. This was something else, a streak of gold and blue cutting across the darkness from north to south, trailing something that looked almost like fire but wasn't, exactly. Clark's eyes adjusted without him thinking about it, zooming in on the object before it dropped below the treeline, and his whole body went still. It was a pod. He was moving before the thought finished forming. He crossed 2 miles of highland terrain in about 4 seconds, touching down in a clearing, just as the object finished burying itself in a bank of soft earth at the edge of a stream. It wasn't large, about the size of a bathtub, maybe smaller, made of some dark metal that was already cooling, steam rising from its surface in the cold night air. The design was nothing Clark recognized, not Kryptonian, not New Genesis, not anything in his considerable catalog of alien craft. It was rounded at one end, angular at the other, covered in symbols that looked almost like runes but weren't quite. He stood over it for a moment. Every instinct he had, and they were good instincts, refined over 30 years of saving the world, said wait, think, don't just something inside it move. Clark had the panel off before he consciously decided to open it, and then he was looking down at a baby. A human baby, or human-looking, which in his experience was not always the same thing. Maybe 10 months old, round-faced, with a wild mess of dark hair that was somehow already going in 17 directions, despite the child having apparently just survived interstellar travel. The baby was awake, blinking up at him with eyes that were so green they were almost alarming, and it had one tiny fist pressed against its mouth in the way babies did when they were trying to decide whether to cry. On the baby's forehead, partly hidden by that ridiculous hair, was a scar, lightning bolt shaped, still faintly pink at the edges like it was new. Hey, Clark said, because what else did you say? The baby looked at him. Then it smiled, a genuine, toothless, full-face smile, and reached up and grabbed Clark's finger. Clark Kent, who had stood unmoved in the path of nuclear warheads, felt something in his chest do something completely unprecedented. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, okay. He picked the child up with the extreme care of someone who was very aware of his own strength, and the child immediately grabbed a fistful of his jacket and settled in like it had been waiting for exactly this. Clark scanned the surrounding area out of habit, no heat signatures within 2 miles, no magical residue that he could detect with conventional senses, though he'd learned over the years that conventional senses weren't always adequate. The pod had a small compartment he'd missed on first look, sealed behind a panel that swung open when he touched it. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, actual parchment, thick and cream-colored and smelling faintly of something he couldn't identify, and a photograph. The photograph moved. Clark stared at it. The people in it, a young man with dark hair and glasses, a young woman with red hair and a warm smile, were waving at him. Actually waving, as if they knew he'd be here, as if they'd taken this photograph specifically for whoever found the pod. The young woman was holding the baby, definitely this baby, same hair, same eyes, and she looked happy and terrified in equal measure, the way people looked when they were doing something they knew might be the last thing they ever did. He unfolded the parchment. The handwriting was quick but clear, like someone who'd written in a hurry but was determined to be understood. If you are reading this, then James and I are gone. Our son's name is Harry. He is extraordinary, even among people like us. He has always been extraordinary, and there are those who will want to use him, or harm him, or make him into something he was never meant to be. We could not stop what was coming, but we could do this one thing. We could put him somewhere safe. Please take care of him. Please let him be a child for as long as he can. Please tell him we loved him more than anything. Lily Potter Clark read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. He looked at the baby, at Harry, who was currently trying to eat his collar. "Well," Clark said, "I'm Clark." Harry Potter looked up at him with those impossible green eyes and said with great confidence, "Bah." "Yeah," Clark agreed. "That's fair." He took the boy home. The first 6 months were, in Clark's own private assessment, the most terrifying experience of his adult life, and this was a man who had once wrestled a Category 5 hurricane into submission with his bare hands. Babies, it turned out, were deeply unpredictable. They didn't respond to logic. They didn't respond to kindness on any consistent schedule. They wanted things they couldn't articulate, at hours that had no relationship to civilized timekeeping, and the wanting was communicated exclusively through a sound that Clark's superhearing made approximately 10 times worse than it would have been for a normal person. He read everything. He read Dr. Spock and T. Barry Brazelton, and 12 different parenting books from the Metropolis Public Library, and 2 wizarding texts he'd eventually tracked down through a very confused owl postal system. He called his mother so often in those first weeks that Martha Kent eventually moved to Metropolis for 3 months, just to help him figure out what he was doing. "He's not crying because something's wrong," his mother told him patiently for what Clark estimated was the 14th time. "He's crying because he's a baby. That's what they do." "I know that," Clark said. "Intellectually, I know that. It doesn't help." Martha looked at him, at Harry, who had paused mid-cry to grab her braid and was now examining it with intense scientific interest, and smiled in a way that Clark recognized as the smile that meant she was going to say something that would take a while to appreciate. "You're going to be wonderful at this," she said. "Mom, I know what I'm talking about." She eased Harry out of his arms and settled the boy against her hip with the ease of someone who'd done this 30 years ago and hadn't forgotten. "You were scared then too. Your father and I both were, and look how you turned out." Clark looked at her. "I'm a Kryptonian with superhuman everything who dresses up in a cape and punches things for a living. And you turned out wonderful," she said firmly. Harry, as if agreeing, reached over and patted Clark's cheek with a tiny open hand. Clark caught the hand reflexively, gently, and the boy grinned at him, that same full-face grin from the clearing in Scotland, the one that still hit him somewhere behind the sternum every single time. He kept Harry. This was never seriously in question, though he spent the first month engaging with it as a question, going through the motions of asking himself whether this was the right call, whether there were better options, whether somewhere in the wizarding world Harry had a more appropriate home waiting. He talked to Alfred, who was not his butler but was Bruce's, and was wise enough to be everyone's. He talked to Diana, who looked at the child and then at Clark and said, with characteristic directness, "You already love him. The rest is paperwork." The paperwork was, in fact, considerable. Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter, had to explain to a series of American bureaucratic systems how he'd come to be in possession of a British infant with no official records. What saved him, and he was never not grateful for this, was that he knew people. Quietly, carefully, through channels that didn't get discussed at press briefings, Harry James Kent was given a birth certificate, a social security number, a passport, and a pediatrician who asked no questions and had excellent professional instincts. Harry James Kent. Clark had kept the James. It felt important to keep the James. He moved out of his apartment. The apartment had been fine for a single man, but it had no yard, and the neighbors below were a young couple who worked night shifts, and Clark had a child who was already, even at 10 months, doing things that could charitably be described as unusual. The first time it happened clearly enough to categorize, Harry was 14 months old and annoyed about being put to bed. Clark had heard the cry go up, had finished the paragraph he was editing at his kitchen table, and walked into the nursery to find Harry standing up in his cot, which was early for standing. Clark had checked, with his hands gripping the rail and every single soft toy in the room floating in a slow, gentle orbit around his head. They circled at about crib height, a parade of stuffed animals drifting through the air with the unhurried ease of things that had always belonged there, and Harry was watching them with an expression of deep satisfaction. Clark stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he walked to the crib, picked Harry up, sat down in the rocking chair and said, "So, we should probably talk about that." Harry, who was 14 months old, said "Gah," and fell asleep on his shoulder. It got more complicated as Harry got older. Not dangerous, it was never dangerous, which told Clark something important about the nature of what Harry was doing, but unpredictable in ways that required management. When Harry was upset, things moved. When he was happy, things glowed. When he was 3 and Clark told him that no, he could not have ice cream before dinner, the kitchen light fixtures had pulsed a vivid amber color for about 4 seconds before returning to normal, and Clark had had to work very hard to keep his face neutral. He started researching in earnest then. Magic was not a foreign concept to Clark. He'd met Zatanna. He knew John Constantine professionally in the distant and complicated way that one knew John Constantine, and so he understood the broad strokes. What he needed to understand was the specifics of Harry's kind of magic, the wizarding tradition, the world his biological parents had come from. It led him eventually to a woman named Arabella Figg, who turned out to be a squib living in Surrey of all places, who knew a great deal about the Potter family, and whose expression when Clark showed up at her door, politely in his civilian clothes with Harry on his hip, cycled through several interesting stages before settling on something like careful relief. "So he's safe," she said, looking at Harry. "He's very safe," Clark said. "Dumbledore will want to know." "I'm sure he will," Clark agreed pleasantly, "but right now I'm more interested in knowing what Harry is, if you don't mind." She made tea. She talked for 3 hours. Clark listened to everything. Albus Dumbledore, as it turned out, had placed Harry with relatives, the Dursleys, which Mrs. Figg described with a barely concealed wince, and had only discovered Harry wasn't there when he'd gone to check on the blood wards and found them incomplete. He'd sent letters. He'd sent owls. He'd done a great deal of investigating. He had not, as far as Mrs. Figg knew, found any answers. Clark thought about what Lily Potter's letter had said about people who would want to use Harry, or make him into something he was never meant to be. He thought about a man who had placed a traumatized infant with people his own associate clearly found inadequate, without, apparently, asking the infant. He thought about war strategies and chess pieces. He left Mrs. Figg his telephone number and told her she was welcome to share it with Professor Dumbledore if she liked. Dumbledore never called. Clark thought that was probably telling. Harry at 5 was a revelation. He was small for his age, with his father's hair, or rather Lily Potter's, Clark supposed, given what Mrs. Figg had told him, and Clark's tendency to stand very straight when he was thinking seriously about something. He had Lily's eyes and James Potter's grin and what Clark had come to recognize, with considerable pride, as his own raised eyebrow. He was also, without question, the most curious person Clark had ever met, which was saying something given that Clark worked with Lois Lane. Harry asked questions the way other children breathed. Why does the sun look bigger when it's near the horizon? Why do birds fly in V shapes? Why is Gotham City so much darker than Metropolis? "Can I come with you when you fly, Dad, just to see what it feels like? I'll hold on really tight, I promise." Clark said yes to the last one when Harry was 5.5. He took him up on a clear morning before the city woke up, rising slowly, letting Harry adjust, and Harry spent the whole flight completely silent, which was sufficiently unprecedented that Clark actually checked to make sure he was breathing. He was. He just had his face turned into the wind and his eyes very wide and his arms spread out to either side of Clark's neck, feeling it, just feeling what it was like to be above everything. When they landed, Harry said, again, very quietly. Clark laughed. "Yeah, okay." He told Harry the truth about himself when Harry was 6. "Not all of it. There was no version of your biological parents were murdered by a dark wizard when you were 15 months old that was appropriate for a 6-year-old, but enough." He sat Harry down at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning and said, "I want to tell you about where I come from." "Okay," Harry said, with the focused attention he brought to anything he considered important. "I'm not from here, not from Earth." Clark watched his son's face. "I'm from a planet called Krypton, which is very far away and which doesn't exist anymore. I was sent here when I was a baby, to keep me safe, and a couple named Jonathan and Martha Kent found me and raised me." He paused. "Kind of like how I found you." Harry considered this. "So you were in a pod too?" Clark blinked. He never told Harry about the pod in any detail. "How did you know about that?" "I heard you tell Grandma." Harry was entirely unembarrassed about this. "When I was supposed to be in bed, you said I arrived in a pod like you did, except the runes were different." Clark stared at him. Then he laughed, which was not the dignified parental response he'd planned, but it was honest. "Yeah. You were in a pod, very similar situation." "Cool," Harry said and meant it entirely. "So we're both aliens. I'm an alien, you're human, but you're also a wizard." "I know," Harry said. Clark waited. "The stuff that happens," Harry explained, with the patient air of someone confirming a thing they'd worked out some time ago. When I'm upset or happy or scared. That's magic, right? Like what Zatanna does, except different. Yes, Clark said. Different but related. Can you teach me? I don't know how yet, Clark said honestly. But I'm going to figure it out, and when I do, yes, absolutely yes. Harry nodded. He picked up his toast and ate it in silence for a moment. Then, Dad. Yeah, were you scared? When they put you in the pod? Clark felt the specific weight of that question, the way it was really several questions nested inside each other, and he answered the real one. I don't remember it, I was too young, but my parents were. He met Harry's eyes. They loved me enough to do the hardest thing they ever did. I think about that a lot. Harry chewed his toast, nodded slowly. My parents did the same thing. Yeah, buddy, they did. Then they were good people. I think they were very good people, Clark said. Harry seemed to settle something internally. He looked up. Okay, can we go flying again after breakfast? Absolutely, Clark said. The years between that conversation and the morning of Harry's 11th birthday passed in the way that good years do, quickly enough that you felt them only in the moments, slowly enough that each moment felt complete. Clark taught Harry to be careful with his strength, which was subtly more than baseline human but not superhuman, more like the kind of low-level physical enhancement that came from years of being around Kryptonian energy. He taught him to be honest, to be curious, to ask questions of authority rather than simply obeying it. He taught him that power was a tool, and tools could be used well or badly, and the difference was not the tool but the hand that held it. Martha taught him to cook, Diana taught him to fight. Lois Lane, who had figured out Harry's parentage through sheer journalistic instinct within about 4 months of meeting him, taught him to ask the follow-up question. The first answer is never the whole story, she told him when he was 9 in the tone she used for things she considered non-negotiable. Always ask what they're not saying. Dad says the same thing, Harry said. Your dad learned it from me, Lois said, and Clark, who was standing 6 feet away, chose not to comment. Harry's magic refined itself as he got older. The involuntary stuff, the light flickers, the floating toys, gave way to something more controlled, still wandless and wordless because there was no wand and no book to tell him otherwise, but increasingly purposeful. He could move things when he concentrated. He could light a candle from across the room. Once when he was 9 and they'd had what Clark privately categorized as their first real argument, every window in the house had blown open simultaneously in a rush of warm summer air, and they'd both stopped mid-sentence, and Harry had looked at his hands and Clark had taken a breath. That was big, Clark said. I know, Harry said, sounding slightly awed, feeling better. Harry thought about it. Kind of, Clark nodded. Good, now let's finish the argument. They did. Harry lost, but Clark made him feel that he'd been heard, which was a different thing from winning. When the letter came, it arrived the way Hogwarts letters apparently always arrived, by owl, a large tawny one that landed on the kitchen windowsill on a Tuesday morning in July and tapped on the glass with evident impatience. Harry opened the window, took the envelope, and turned it over to look at the emerald green wax seal. Dad, he said, with a calm that Clark recognized as the calm of someone who'd been half expecting exactly this. There's an H on this. Clark set down his coffee. He'd been expecting this too. Yep. Harry broke the seal, read the letter, read it again, set it down on the table. They want me to go to school, he said. A magic school. Hogwarts, Clark said. In Scotland, it's supposed to be excellent. Harry looked at him with narrowed eyes. How long have you known about this? A few years. Clark kept his expression mild. Didn't want to preempt anything. Dad, you'd have worried about it. I would have researched it, Harry said, with Hermione levels of dignity that Clark found remarkable given that he hadn't met Hermione yet. He picked up the letter again. They want me to start in September. That's how schools work. It's in Scotland. I know. Harry looked at him. Something moved across his face, not fear, Clark noted, which was not surprising, more like the particular combination of excitement and calculation that he recognized from the face he saw in the mirror every morning. The boy was already working it out, already 3 steps ahead. I want to go, Harry said. I know, but I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. Clark smiled. He couldn't help it. I'd be disappointed if you did. Harry picked up his toast, looked out the window at the tawny owl which was now helping itself to the fruit bowl, and said, we should probably go shopping. We should probably go to Diagon Alley, Clark agreed, which means we need to find a pub called the Leaky Cauldron, which is apparently in London. Harry stared at him. How do you know all of this? I read. You read everything. Occupational hazard, Clark said, and got up to find the owl a proper meal. Diagon Alley on a summer afternoon was sensory overload by any measure, and Clark Kent had stood in the middle of a Gordanian warship in active combat. He managed. Harry, walking beside him and slightly ahead, that Kent habit of leading with your curiosity, was managing considerably better. He took the moving staircases in stride, barely blinked at the robes hanging themselves in Madame Malkin's window, and watched a crate of live frogs levitate itself out of an apothecary's doorway with the expression of a boy who had been waiting his whole life for someone else to show him that the world was exactly as strange as he'd always suspected. Gringotts was interesting. The goblin at the main desk looked at Clark with the flat professional assessment of someone who dealt with unusual visitors regularly, and then looked at Harry, and something shifted very slightly in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or something like it. A vault, Clark said pleasantly. In the name of Harry James Kent, whatever's in the Potter vault can stay where it is for now. I just want to open a new account and make a transfer. The goblin Griffook, his badge read, looked at Harry for another long moment. And you are the child's guardian. I am, Clark said. He is, Harry confirmed in a tone that didn't invite argument. Griffook processed this with admirable efficiency. They rode the cart. Harry held the cart with both hands and looked delighted. Clark kept one hand near his son's shoulder and catalogued approximately 47 ways the cart could fail mechanically, and what he'd do about each. They found the Potter vault, as it turned out, because Griffook brought it up himself, with the careful neutrality of a banker processing a complicated estate. It was, Clark reflected, considerable. Harry pressed his hand to the lock, which apparently was blood-keyed, something that Clark added to his internal list of things to have opinions about later, and the door swung open. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the gold coins and the artifacts and the small chest at the back that glowed faintly purple. He was quiet for longer than usual. They were successful, Clark said, which was not the same as saying they were rich but covered it. Yeah, Harry said. He walked in, picked up a small coin, turned it over in his fingers, set it back down carefully. I don't want to touch too much, not yet. Okay, Clark said, no pressure, no explanation required. Can we just take enough for my supplies and come back another time? Whatever you want, Clark said. Harry nodded. He picked up a leather satchel he found on a shelf, filled it with what he judged to be a reasonable amount, and walked back out. They bought robes from Madame Malkin's, where Harry stood for measurements next to a pale blonde boy who introduced himself as Draco Malfoy with the air of someone announcing a title, and who looked at Harry with a particular kind of assessing curiosity that Clark, watching from the side, recognized as the look of someone who was trying to figure out exactly what kind of threat had just walked into the room. You're Harry Potter, the Malfoy boy said. Harry glanced at him mildly. Harry Kent. Draco processed this. My father says, I'd be interested in what you think, Harry said pleasantly. Not your father. Dead silence. Even the seamstress's enchanted measuring tape seemed to pause. Draco stared at him. Something flickered across his face, surprise, then something more complicated, than the shuddered expression of someone who'd been caught off guard and didn't like it. I think, he said carefully, that you're not what I expected. Good, Harry said, and smiled. They bought the wand last. Or rather, the wand chose Harry last, after 11 rejected candidates, which made Ollivander increasingly agitated and fascinated in equal measure. When the 12th wand was placed in Harry's hand, Holly 11 inches, phoenix feather, the shop filled with light so warm and gold it was like a sunset had happened indoors, and Ollivander stood very still for a long moment before he said, Curious, very curious. What is? Harry asked. The phoenix that gave the feather for your wand, Ollivander said, looking at Harry over his tape measure with an expression of keen-edged wonder, gave another feather, just one other. A pause. The wand that gave you that scar is also in my records. Harry touched the scar on his forehead without thinking, then lowered his hand. Voldemort's wand. Ollivander blinked. Most people apparently didn't say the name. Yes, Harry said, examining his wand with interest. So we're connected. In a manner of speaking. Good to know, Harry said, pocketing the wand and dug out the money for it with the ease of someone who found this informative but not particularly alarming. Outside, Clark fell into step beside him. You okay? Very okay, Harry said. He was turning something over in his mind. Clark knew the look, but he was unbothered. Genuinely unbothered, not performing it. Clark looked at his son, this boy who had landed in the Scottish Highlands in a pod and grabbed his finger and never really let go, and felt something he'd felt 100 times over the past 10 years, but that still surprised him with its force. Pride, the specific, unearned, unconditional pride of a parent who had watched something extraordinary grow up under his roof. Dad, Harry said. Yeah, thank you for not hiding me. He said it simply, the way Harry said all important things. For not making me be something smaller than what I am. Clark stopped walking. He had to, just for a second, because his throat was doing something inconvenient. You're my son, he said, when he trusted his voice. You were never going to be small. Harry looked up at him with those green eyes that had been looking up at him his whole life. Then he bumped his shoulder against Clark's arm in that understated, affectionate way he'd developed somewhere around age 8 and said, "Come on, I want to find a book about Hogwarts before we go home." Clark pulled himself together and followed his son through the warm afternoon crowd of Diagon Alley, where witches and wizards moved around them like water around two stones, and the wand in Harry's pocket glowed very faintly with a warmth that had nothing to do with phoenix feathers. Chapter 2, The Sorting of Harry Kent. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock precisely, and Harry Kent was on it with 4 minutes to spare. This was Clark's fault, technically, in the sense that Clark had insisted on checking Harry's trunk 3 times, and then standing on platform 9 3/4 for a full 10 minutes just looking at the train with an expression that Harry recognized as his father trying very hard not to make this into a moment. "Dad," Harry said. "I'm fine," Clark said. "You're doing the thing." "I'm not doing a thing. You're doing the thing where you look completely calm and your jaw is slightly tight." Clark exhaled through his nose. Around them, the platform was a cheerful chaos of owls and trunks and families saying goodbye, steam billowing from the scarlet engine in warm white clouds. A small girl nearby was crying. Her mother was holding it together admirably. Clark was taking visible notes. "I know you can handle yourself," Clark said. "I'm not worried about that." "Then what are you worried about?" Clark looked at him directly, which was the thing about Clark Kent that Harry had understood since he was very small. The man was constitutionally incapable of being indirect when it mattered. "I'm worried that you'll be lonely before you find your people." Harry considered this honestly. It was a real concern, not an unreasonable one, and he respected it as such. "I won't be lonely," he said. "I'm too curious to be lonely, and I'll call. The owls take 3 days. I'll figure something out," Harry said. He held out his hand, and Clark looked at it for half a second before pulling him into a hug instead, brief and firm, the kind of hug that communicated very efficiently that it was the compression of approximately 1,000 things that didn't need to be said. "Be yourself," Clark said into the top of his head. "Obviously," Harry said. "Don't let anyone make you small. Dad, obviously, and eat actual meals, not just." "Okay, the train is leaving," Harry said, extricating himself with dignity and grabbing his trunk. "I love you, I'll write goodbye." He was up the steps and into the corridor before the whistle finished blowing. He found a window, slid it open, and leaned out just long enough to see his father on the platform, tall, dark-haired, watching the train pull away with his hands in his jacket pockets and that jaw thing still going, and waved once. Clark raised a hand, smiled. The jaw thing eased. Harry closed the window and went to find a compartment. He found one that was mostly empty except for a red-haired boy who was sitting with his legs stretched out and a chocolate frog halfway to his mouth, who startled when the door slid open and then looked at Harry with the frank, uncomplicated assessment of someone who hadn't yet decided whether to be interested. "Is this taken?" Harry asked. "Nope." The boy moved his legs. "Ron Weasley, Harry Kent." He hoisted his trunk into the overhead rack. It was heavier than it looked because he'd packed 6 extra books, which Clark had noticed and not commented on, and sat down. "Is that chocolate frog?" "Yeah, you want one. My mum packed about 40. 40. There are 7 of us." Ron said this with the resigned equanimity of someone who had made peace with arithmetic. "I'm the 6th. You're going to Hogwarts." "That would be why I'm on this train, yes," Harry said. Ron grinned. He had a good grin, wide and slightly lopsided, the kind that made you want to grin back. "Fair point. You nervous?" "Not really." Harry accepted the chocolate frog and caught it before it could leap from his hand, which made Ron look briefly impressed. "You." "Terrified," Ron said cheerfully. 5 older brothers. All of them did something brilliant at Hogwarts. Bill was head boy. Charlie caught the snitch in his first match. Percy got, well, Percy. He said Percy in the tone of someone dealing with a complicated family situation. Fred and George basically run the place even though they're only 3rd years. And then there's me. And then there's you, Harry agreed. "Exactly." Ron pulled out another frog. "What about you? Any magical family?" "No," Harry said. "Well, yes, sort of. It's complicated." Ron accepted this without pushing, which Harry noted as a positive indicator. "Your dad come to see you off." "Yeah. What's he like?" Harry thought about how to answer that. "He's big," he settled on, which was both literally true and true in every other sense. "He takes up a lot of space even when he's being quiet. He's the most genuinely good person I've ever met." He paused. "And he worries. He hides it, but he worries." Ron nodded like this was a recognizable description of a parent. "Mine's the same," she cried. "Mum always cries when one of us leaves, even now." He said this with the mild exasperation of someone who was also, clearly, moved by it. "You'll probably meet my brothers on the train, Fred and George anyway. They'll try to sell you something. Don't buy anything they made themselves." Noted, Harry said. The frog card from his chocolate frog was Dumbledore, which Harry looked at with interest. A man with a very long silver beard, half-moon glasses, and eyes that were doing something complicated even in portrait form. He filed it away. The compartment door slid open again about an hour into the journey, this time admitting a girl with a lot of brown hair and a very organized energy about her who looked at the two of them with the expression of someone with a purpose. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost his toad. No toad, Ron said. I haven't, Harry said, but if it helps, there's one under the seat opposite. The girl blinked, looked at the seat. There was indeed a toad sitting very flat and still against the baseboard, in the manner of toads who believe they are invisible. How did you? She looked at Harry. You have very good eyes. Exceptionally good, Harry agreed without expanding on it. She retrieved the toad with efficient competence, then turned back to them with the decisive air of someone who had handled one errand and was already planning the next. I'm Hermione Granger. Have you both read Hogwarts, a history? No, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. Hermione looked at him with a new and significantly elevated level of interest. Did you? All of it. Twice, Harry said. The section on the founders was interesting. Especially Slytherin's departure. Most accounts treat it as ideological, but if you read between the lines, it reads more like a breakup. There was a pause. That's exactly what it reads like, Hermione said, with the fierce agreement of someone who'd had this opinion and never found anyone to share it with, and sat down. Draco Malfoy arrived approximately an hour before the train reached Scotland, accompanied by two large boys who had the physical dimensions and conversational range of wardrobes. He looked at Harry with that same assessing expression from Madame Malkin's, calculating, not quite hostile, still trying to work out what Harry was. His gaze moved to Ron and dismissed him in about 2 seconds with the ease of someone who'd already categorized Weasley and found the category familiar. Then back to Harry. I heard you were on the train, Draco said. Word travels fast, Harry said. He was leaning against the window reading the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, which he'd already half finished, and he didn't put it down. Draco's jaw tightened slightly at not being the center of immediate attention. I could introduce you around. Show you who matters. I appreciate that, Harry said. He did glance up then, and his expression was perfectly pleasant. I'll figure out who matters on my own, I think, but thanks. In this world, Draco said with the measured cadence of something he'd probably rehearsed, the right alliances matter. Your father, my father is Clark Kent, Harry said. Metropolis, he's a reporter. What about him? Draco blinked. That clearly wasn't the name he'd expected. I meant you're your real father, James Potter. Clark Kent is my real father, Harry said. Not angry, just clear. The kind of clear that didn't invite negotiation. Another silence. The wardrobe boys looked at each other. Potter's a legendary name in this world, Draco said. He'd recalibrated. Harry noticed this, filed it away. Smart kid, adaptable. You could use that. Or I could just be Harry Kent and see how that goes, Harry said. Excuse me. He went back to his book. Draco stood in the doorway for another 3 seconds. Harry could feel him doing it, the way you could feel someone deciding something, and then left. The door slid shut. Ron let out a breath. That's Malfoy. His father's. I know who his father is, Harry said. He turned a page. He's not his father. Most people don't say that to his face. Most people let first impressions do too much work, Harry said. Hermione was looking at him with the expression she'd started developing around the Toad incident, not quite hero worship, more like intellectual recognition. Like finding a species she hadn't classified yet. You're going to be interesting at Hogwarts, she said. I really hope so, Harry said sincerely and turned another page. The castle, when it appeared across the black water of the lake, hit Harry somewhere behind the ribs. He'd read descriptions. He'd studied the architecture, Gothic, largely, with a modified floor plan that responded to the castle's own magical consciousness, which was something he'd found only in one obscure text and had been genuinely excited about. He thought he'd been prepared. He had not been prepared for the way it looked at night, towers lit from within, reflected in the still water below, so massive and so alive that it made the air feel heavier and more real, like the world had a pulse here. He was in a boat with Ron and Hermione and a very nervous boy named Neville Longbottom, who was holding his recovered Toad with both hands and looking at the castle like a man preparing for battle. Harry liked him immediately. You all right? Harry asked him. Getting there, Neville said, which Harry respected as an honest answer. It's bigger than I expected, Ron said, looking up at the towers. The central tower adds approximately 40 feet beyond what any blueprint records, Harry said. The castle expanded it in 1612. No one's entirely sure why. The castle expanded it, Ron said. The castle is semi-sentient, Hermione said. in the tone of someone who was very pleased someone else already knew this. "It responds to magic," Harry and Hermione said simultaneously, and then looked at each other, and Hermione smiled in the slightly surprised way of someone who kept expecting to be the smartest person in any given conversation, and found the adjustment more pleasant than anticipated. Hagrid, who had shepherded them across the lake with the ease of a man for whom a rowboat was merely a very small boat, lifted Harry clear out of his with one hand when they docked, and Harry went without resistance and said thanks and meant it, and Hagrid looked at him with those beetle-black eyes, and something warm and wondering moved across his enormous face. "You look juste like your dad," Hagrid said quietly, meaning James. Harry understood. "But your eyes, my mum," Harry said. "Yeah." Hagrid set him down gently. Yeah, she had eyes like thaw. He seemed moved, and Harry let him be moved, and they walked up to the castle together. The Sorting Hat was older than Harry had expected. This was irrational. He'd known it was 1,000 years old, but ancient objects often look one thing on the page and another in person, and the hat, sitting on a three-legged stool at the front of the Great Hall while 400 students watched, was a genuine artifact. He could feel it from the line of first years, something about the way the air sat around it. He watched it work through his classmates while he waited. It put students into houses with a speed that ranged from instant to several long minutes of visible deliberation. Hermione went to Gryffindor with an alacrity that suggested the hat had made up its mind before she sat down, and her face when she walked to the table was the face of someone whose hypothesis had been confirmed. Ron went Gryffindor. Neville went Gryffindor after about 45 seconds of what Harry could only describe as negotiation, Neville's expression going through several stages before settling into tentative acceptance. Draco Malfoy went Slytherin before the hat had fully touched his head. Then, Kent Harry. Harry walked to the stool with his hands easy at his sides, sat down, and the hat dropped over his eyes. Darkness. And then a voice, old and dry and surprisingly conversational, like the interior monologue of a very intelligent book, said, "Well, that's new, is it?" Harry said in his head. "I've sorted over 1,000 years of students, child. Witches, wizards, children of old families and first generations, a metamorphmagus once, and what I believe was technically a vampire on a paperwork technicality." A pause. "I have never sorted anything like you." "I'm Harry Kent," Harry said. "You are many things," the hat said, with what might have been amusement. "I can see your mother's gift, deep, complex, old magic, older than wandwork, older than what most people who call themselves wizards even touch. And something else, something that isn't magical at all and yet isn't not magical." Another pause longer. "You were raised outside our world." "In Metropolis," Harry agreed, "by a man who is not like other men." "By my dad," Harry said, and the evenness in that sentence was absolute. The hat seemed to consider this for a moment. Harry could feel it actually thinking. It wasn't a passive process. There was genuine cognition happening somewhere in the aged fabric. "Gryffindor would have you for your courage, Ravenclaw for your mind, Hufflepuff for your loyalty." A longer pause. "And Slytherin, not Slytherin," Harry said, not angry, just clear. "You haven't heard why. Tell me." "Because you understand power," the hat said. "You were raised by someone who has more of it than almost any living being, and you watched him choose every single day to use it carefully. That kind of understanding is rare. Slytherin would value it." Harry thought about this honestly. The hat felt his honesty and seemed to appreciate it. "My mother died to save me," Harry said. "That's where my magic comes from, her sacrifice. I think that means something about what house I should be in." Silence in the hat. "You know about that." "My dad told me everything he found out. He believes in giving me the whole picture." "Most children." "I'm not most children," Harry said. "You already said so." The hat laughed. It was not a sound anyone outside Harry's head could hear, but it was unmistakably a laugh, a deep, old, genuinely delighted one. "Number you are not." And then louder so the whole hall could hear. "Gryffindor." The table on the far left erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, assessing, sharp, something that might have been approval, and walked to the Gryffindor table, where Ron shoved over to make room and Hermione was already turning to face him, and a pair of identical red-haired boys at the far end were standing on their bench to get a better look. "Harry Kent," one of them said. "Fred Weasley," the other said, and then they switched. "George Weasley, Fred Weasley," without blinking. "Nice to meet you both," Harry said, sitting down. "The hat took a while with you," Fred or George said. "We had a conversation," Harry said. Both of them looked at each other. "You talked to the hat." "It talked first," Harry said, and reached for the pumpkin juice. The Great Hall at dinner was something Harry decided immediately that he was going to love. Not because of the food, though the food was remarkable. His dad cooked, but he cooked the way a man cooked when he'd learned cooking as a practical skill rather than a joy, and the Hogwarts kitchen clearly operated on different principles. It was the room, the 1,000 candles floating overhead. The enchanted ceiling showing the night sky, stars throwing cold light down through what looked like air but was stone and magic. The sound of it, hundreds of voices, the acoustic richness of a space built for exactly this, people eating and talking and living. Harry liked rooms that felt lived in. This one felt lived in by centuries. Ron was eating with the focused dedication of someone making up for a long train journey, but he was also talking, which Harry discovered was a Ron specialty, the ability to do several things simultaneously while remaining genuinely engaged with all of them. He told Harry about Quidditch, about which he had opinions. He told Harry about the Weasley family history at Hogwarts, which was long and varied. He said around a mouthful of chicken, "My mum's going to lose it when I write home that I'm sitting next to Harry Potter." "Harry Kent," Harry said. "Right, yeah." Ron didn't make it a big deal, which Harry appreciated. "Why Kent though? Your dad's name." "My dad's name," Harry agreed. "I'm his son." Ron considered this and apparently found it completely satisfying because he went back to the chicken. Hermione, on Harry's other side, had a parchment out and was already making notes, which Harry respected as an approach. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what the hat said, or what I imagine it said, given how long it took." "It had questions," Harry said. "About what?" Harry picked up his goblet. "What I am, mostly. And what are you?" Hermione asked, with genuine curiosity and zero judgment. Harry thought about his dad on the platform, jaw tight, hands in his pockets, watching the train go. He thought about 10 years of flying before the city woke up, and honest conversations at kitchen tables, and the exact weight of being someone's whole world and having them be yours. "Harry Kent," he said, "mostly." Hermione nodded slowly, like she was adding this to a mental file she planned to revisit. "I think that's going to be more complicated than it sounds." "Probably," Harry agreed. "Good," Hermione said, and went back to her notes. At the head of the hall at the staff table, Harry let his gaze move along the professors. McGonagall, stern and watchful, a tiny woman with an enormous pointed hat, a heavy-set man with a magnificent mustache, and at the end a tall figure in a turban who was looking at Harry with an intensity that was slightly too pointed, slightly too sustained to read as normal curiosity. Harry held the gaze for a moment. The turbaned professor, Quirrell, he'd find out, looked away first, quickly. Harry looked back at his food, filed it away. His dad had told him once, in the context of something else entirely, that the thing about genuine threats was that they usually announced themselves if you were paying attention. Most people just weren't paying attention. Harry was always paying attention. He was still thinking about it when the headmaster rose to speak, and Dumbledore was, in person, something that photographs and portraits didn't quite capture. He was tall and vital in a way that old age hadn't diminished, and his eyes behind the half-moon glasses were exactly as complicated as the card had suggested, bright and warm and calculating all at once. He looked at the student body with what read, very convincingly, as benevolent delight. He also looked at Harry for just a fraction too long. Harry looked back with frank, uncomplicated attention. Dumbledore smiled, and it was a genuine smile, Harry thought, but layered. A man who had been playing chess for a very long time, smiling at a piece that had arrived on the board from an unexpected direction. "Welcome," he said, spreading his hands wide, and his voice filled the hall the way a great voice was supposed to, with warmth and depth and the ease of a man who'd spoken to rooms this size so many times that the room itself seemed glad to have him. "Welcome to Hogwarts." Harry applauded with everyone else and thought, "I see you," and then thought with a clarity that surprised even him, "I'm not a piece." He picked up his fork and ate his dinner, and the enchanted sky above him spread its stars out quietly, and somewhere in Metropolis his father was probably already at his desk, keeping busy, not thinking about the train. Ron elbowed him. "Try the treacle tart." "Seriously." Harry tried the treacle tart. It was extraordinary. "Ron," he said, "Yeah. I think I'm going to like it here." Ron grinned at him, that good, wide, lopsided grin. "Yeah," he said, "me too." The dormitory was in the Gryffindor Tower, accessed by a spiral staircase that went up further than the architecture outside strictly suggested it should, which Harry found delightful. There were 5 beds, 5 trunks, 5 windows looking out over the grounds where the Black Lake was a dark mirror in the moonlight, and the Forbidden Forest was a dense wall of shadow at the edge of the grass. Neville was already there, sitting on his bed and looking at his toad with the expression of a man taking stock. A boy named Dean Thomas was unpacking with cheerful efficiency. A boy named Seamus Finnegan was explaining at length to no one in particular how he'd managed to blow up 3 separate items on the train, apparently not as a complaint but as a badge of honor. Harry sat on his bed, the one by the window, which he'd chosen immediately and without competition because everyone else had looked at it and thought cold, and he'd looked at it and thought stars, and opened his trunk, and right on top, where he'd put it deliberately, was a photograph. Not a wizarding photograph. A regular one. Clark at some function in Metropolis, laughing at something Lois had apparently just said, in a dark suit and glasses, looking entirely normal and entirely himself. Harry had taken it himself 2 years ago with a disposable camera he'd bought for a school project. He put it on the nightstand. He looked at it for a moment. Then he got ready for bed, with the efficient routine his dad had instilled in him and that he'd never actually stopped maintaining even when it felt unnecessary, and he lay down and looked at the ceiling and thought about turbaned professors and chess pieces and what the next day would be like. The castle settled around him, that quiet breathing sound of an old place at rest, creaks and sighs, and the distant impression of magic moving through stone. Harry listened to it until he understood the rhythm of it, the way you listen to a new house until it made sense. Then he closed his eyes. He was asleep in 4 minutes. Chapter 3. The man who sees everything. The thing about Hogwarts that Harry hadn't fully anticipated was the way the magic was everywhere, not in an overwhelming way, more like background radiation. The way Metropolis always smelled faintly of the Hudson and hot concrete, or the way Clark's study always carried the particular quiet of a man who read seriously and often. Hogwarts had its own ambient hum, something in the walls and floors, in the way the staircases shifted and the portraits argued and the candles burned without melting. It was alive in a way that no building he'd ever been in was alive, and Harry spent the first week simply absorbing it, cataloging it, letting it become normal. He was 3 days into this when he figured out that Professor Quirrell was lying about something. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. It came during defense against the dark arts, which was the class Harry had been most looking forward to and which was proving, so far, to be a significant disappointment. Quirrell taught with the nervous energy of someone performing nervousness, the stutter slightly too consistent, the anxious glances slightly too well-timed, the timidity slightly too maintained. Real anxiety was irregular. It spiked and faded. Quirrell's barely varied, which meant it wasn't anxiety at all. It was a costume. Harry sat in the third row between Ron and Hermione and watched Quirrell explain, with elaborate trepidation, why garlic was useful against vampires, which it wasn't actually. Harry had looked this up and thought, "What are you hiding under the turban?" He didn't say this out loud. His dad had also taught him that knowing something and saying something were different decisions that required different calculations. He filed it away with the look from the sorting feast and kept watching. "You're doing that thing," Ron said under his breath. "What thing?" "The thing where your face goes really still and you look like you're solving something." "I'm paying attention to the lecture," Harry said. "Nobody pays attention to Quirrell like that," Ron said. "It's defense class, not arithmancy." "Maybe it should be," Harry said. Hermione, on his other side, had already written 2 inches of notes and was starting a third. She leaned over without looking up. "He's wrong about the garlic," she said quietly. "I know," Harry said, "and about the incantation he used last Tuesday. He mispronounced Lumos twice and neither time was accidental." Harry looked at her with renewed appreciation. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything," Hermione said with perfect sincerity and kept writing. Potions was its own education. Snape swept into the dungeon classroom on the second day of term with the dramatic timing of a man who understood theatrics and deployed them deliberately, and opened with a speech that Harry recognized, even as it was happening, as a performance of power. The dark room, the cool voice, the pointed pause before each name on the register, all of it designed to establish hierarchy before a single cauldron was lit. "Potter," Snape said, and the pause he put before it was loaded with something that had nothing to do with Harry specifically, and everything to do with a dead man and 11 years of complicated feelings. "Kent," Harry said pleasantly. Snape looked up from the register. His eyes were black and very sharp, and they fixed on Harry with an intensity that was meant to be unsettling. Harry met them with comfortable equanimity. "I beg your pardon, Harry Kent," Harry said. "I think there might be a registration error." "My dad's name is Kent. Your father," Snape said, in a tone that compressed several things into 2 words, "was James Potter." "James Potter contributed to my existence," Harry said. "Clark Kent raised me. In my experience, that's the more relevant category." He kept his voice easy, his expression open. "Sir." The classroom was very quiet. 21st years sitting in frozen attention, most of them staring either at Snape or at Harry with the wide eyes of people watching something they'd been told was impossible. Snape's jaw worked slightly. A muscle near his eye tightened. He looked at Harry for a long moment, that sharp-edged, searching look, and something moved through his expression that Harry couldn't quite categorize. Not anger exactly, something with more layers than anger. "As I was saying," Snape said after a pause that made its own kind of point, "Mr. Kent." He let the name sit, moved on. Ron exhaled beside Harry. "That was fine," Harry said. "He could take points." "He didn't," Harry said. He set up his textbook and opened it to the correct page. "Let's make a decent potion." Ron looked at him sideways. "Does anything actually bother you?" Harry thought about this honestly. "Yeah," he said, "just not that." They made a better than decent potion. Actually, Harry had done the reading and had opinions about cauldron temperature that turned out to be correct, and Hermione at the next table had the same opinions and was somewhat annoyed to discover she wasn't the only first year who'd read ahead. They finished 4 minutes early. Snape inspected it without commenting, which Ron interpreted as a good sign on the grounds that a bad sign would have involved commentary. At the end of class, as they were packing up, Snape said, without looking up from the desk he was annotating, "Mr. Kent, stay a moment." Harry stayed. Ron shot him a look of solidarity and Hermione one of calculating curiosity, and then they were gone and it was just Harry and Snape in the dungeon. Snape didn't speak for almost a full minute. He kept annotating. Harry waited with his bag over his shoulder and his hands easy and let the silence be. "You look like your father," Snape finally said. "Not warm, not cold, just stated." "So I've been told," Harry said. "James Potter was arrogant," Snape said, still not looking up. "He presumed on his talent. He expected the world to accommodate him." "That sounds like someone worth knowing about," Harry said. "Not necessarily someone to emulate." Snape looked up. That sharp gaze again, going somewhere behind Harry's eyes, looking for something. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Professor Quirrell said something similar, on the train indirectly." Harry paused. "What were you expecting?" "Your father's ego wearing your mother's eyes," Snape said, with a bluntness that Harry appreciated more than the man probably intended. "My mother's sacrifice is the reason I'm alive," Harry said. "I know what she did and what it cost. I'm not going to waste it." He held Snape's gaze steadily. "I'm not James Potter and I'm not Lily Potter and I'm not trying to be either. I'm just Harry." Snape looked at him for another long moment. Then he went back to his parchment. "You may go." Harry went. At the door he stopped, half-turned. "Sir, the Bezoar reference on page 37. The text says 3 seconds of submersion. Most sources say 5. A pause. "Most sources are correct," Snape said without looking up. "I'll use 5, Harry said and left. Flying lessons were on Thursday. Harry showed up knowing how to fly, which presented a social complication he'd already considered and addressed internally. The context was this. Clark had taught him to fly in the sense that Clark flew and Harry held on, which was different from being a flyer yourself. On a broomstick, Harry was technically a beginner. His physical instincts were excellent, his balance was good, his understanding of altitude and air current was better than most adults, but the broom was new and he let it be new. He rose to about 6 feet, hovered, got a feel for it. This was genuinely, legitimately thrilling in a way he hadn't anticipated, not his father's flying, which was vast and effortless and felt like being held by the sky, but something more mechanical and therefore, somehow more personal. He was doing this himself. Beside him, Ron was at approximately the same height and grinning. Further down the line, Neville had risen slightly too fast and was already drifting. Harry watched Neville, tracked the trajectory. It a quiet calculation. Madame Hooch hadn't looked up yet. She was correcting Ron's grip with brisk efficiency back to the class. Neville was going sideways toward the stone wall of the castle, slow enough to look controlled, fast enough to become a problem in about 8 seconds. Harry moved his broom without thinking about it, cutting across the line smoothly, interposing himself between Neville and the wall, and caught Neville's broom arm with one hand and steadied them both. "Lean back slightly," Harry said. "You're gripping the front too hard. It's pitching your weight forward." Neville, who had been 3 seconds from collision and clearly knew it, looked at him with the expression of someone experiencing retroactive terror. "How did you?" "I watch things," Harry said. "Lean back." Neville leaned back, his broom leveled. He let out a long breath. "Thanks," he said quietly. "Don't mention it," Harry said, and meant it in the literal sense. Neville looked like the kind of person for whom public rescuing would be more embarrassing than the original problem. Madame Hooch looked up. Assessed the line. Her gaze lingered on Harry and Neville's relative positions with the quick professional read of a woman who'd been teaching flying for 30 years. She said nothing, but she watched Harry for the rest of the class with a look that was more interested than anything else. After, when the class had dispersed across the grounds in the loose way of people released into a Tuesday afternoon, Ron fell into step beside Harry and said, without any particular preamble, "You knew Neville was going to hit the wall." "Pretty much," Harry said, "before it happened." Yes, Ron considered this. My brother Charlie was like that, he said. Spatial awareness, Mum called it. He could read a Quidditch pitch before the game started, knew where every player was going to be. He glanced at Harry sideways. You should try out for the team. First years don't play Quidditch, Harry said. First years are not supposed to play Quidditch, Ron corrected, with the precise air of someone who knew the difference. Those are different statements. Harry laughed, a genuine one, the kind that surprised him slightly. He'd laughed more in 3 days at Hogwarts than he sometimes did in weeks in Metropolis, and the thought brought its own complicated feeling, affection for this place, and something like mild homesickness that wasn't really about a place but a person. His dad at the kitchen table in the morning, the particular quiet of the apartment at night. He'd write tonight, he decided, find an owl that looked reliable. The owl turned out to be named Archimedes by the student who owned him, though Harry privately renamed him something more functional, and the letter he sent arrived, he was told, in Metropolis in 4 days, which was still 3 days too slow, but it was what it was. What he wrote was this: Dad, Hogwarts is extraordinary. The castle is alive in the way I told you it probably was based on the texts, and I was right, but being right didn't prepare me for what that actually means. Ron Weasley is excellent, and Hermione Granger is the most organized person I've ever met outside of you and Lois. The flying lesson was good. I've started paying close attention to Quirrell, and I'll tell you what I find. Say hi to Lois. Tell her I found the follow-up question in the first week. Harry P.S. The treacle tart here is extraordinary. I don't say that to be cruel. He thought about adding something about Snape, and about Dumbledore, and about the way he'd felt looking at the Great Hall ceiling and thinking about his mother. He thought about adding, I miss you. He didn't because his dad would know, and because some things communicated better in the space between sentences. He did add, right at the bottom, in smaller writing, the castle sounds like you, when it's quiet at night, like something big that's being careful. He folded it, attached it to the owl, and watched it go from the owlery window into the blue morning air. 4 weeks into term, on a Friday evening, the thing with the troll happened. It started, as things at Hogwarts apparently started, with information arriving in the wrong order. Hermione had said something cutting to Ron outside Charms. She was going through a phase of being right in a way that didn't account for how it landed, and Ron had said something cutting back, and Hermione had walked off with her chin up and her eyes bright, and had not come to the Halloween feast. Harry had been aware of this in the way he was aware of most things, logged it but not addressed it yet, waiting for the right moment. The right moment became urgent when Professor Quirrell burst into the Great Hall looking genuinely frantic, which was different from his usual performance of frantic, and Harry sat up straight and announced in a voice stripped of the stutter that there was a troll in the dungeon. Then he fainted. Harry watched him hit the floor with the specific attention of someone noting that a man who usually stuttered had just delivered a perfectly articulate sentence under stress, and also noting that the faint came about 2 seconds after the sentence, which was 1 second too late to be an involuntary response. But that was a problem for after. Hermione's in the bathroom, Harry said to Ron, already standing. Ron stared at him. How do you? She wasn't at the feast. The nearest girl's bathroom to the path she'd have taken is on the second-floor corridor, past the library. Harry was already moving against the flow of students being herded by prefects. Come on. The prefects are supposed to. The prefects are taking everyone away from the dungeons, Harry said. The troll is in the dungeon. Hermione's on the second floor. He glanced back. You coming? Ron came. They moved through emptied corridors fast, Harry navigating from the mental map he'd built in 4 weeks of deliberate exploration. The castle helped. This was something Harry had noticed, that the castle seemed to do small things when he moved through it with purpose. A door slightly ajar. A torch that illuminated a turning just before he needed to see it. He didn't know if it was the castle specifically or just good architecture, but he appreciated it. They heard the troll before they saw it, a slow, grinding movement and a sound like someone dragging furniture, coming from the girl's bathroom around the corner. Harry motioned Ron to the wall, went to the corner, looked. The troll was big. 12 feet, which he'd read, but 12 feet in print and 12 feet in the narrow corridor of a castle were different experiences. It took up most of the width of the hall, gray-skinned and reeking, the small eyes moving with the dim deliberateness of something that had recently smelled something and was following the smell. It turned and went through the bathroom door. 2 seconds later, a scream. Harry went through the door. Hermione was backed against the far wall between 2 sinks, a troll in front of her, a club the size of a young tree in the troll's hand. She was not crying. She was clearly terrified, but she was also very deliberately not crying, which Harry registered as important character information. She saw Harry and Ron appear in the doorway, and something in her face shifted from terror to complicated terror. "Distract it," Harry said to Ron, and went left. Ron, to his considerable credit, didn't freeze. He grabbed a tap from the nearest sink. It wrenched off in his hand with a groan of old plumbing and threw it at the troll's head. It bounced off with a hollow clang. The troll turned. Harry went up the side wall. Not flying, he wasn't going to fly. That wasn't something he could explain to Hermione yet. But the wall had tiled ridges at regular intervals, and Harry was strong and quick, and 4 weeks of moving through a magical castle had given him the physical confidence of something between a gymnast and a mountain cat. He got height, got above the troll's head, and found the thing he was looking for, the club and the grip the troll had on it. He landed on the troll's shoulders, which was like landing on a moving boulder, the creature lurching and bellowing, got both hands on the club just above the troll's fists and wrenched. The troll was enormously strong. Harry was not enormous, but he was Clark Kent's son in every way that mattered, and one of the ways it mattered right now was that 11 years of being in proximity to Kryptonian energy had done something small but real to his baseline. He wasn't Superman. He wasn't going to be Superman, but he was Harry Kent, and he had got the leverage right, and the club came free. He dropped off the troll's back, landed in a crouch, stood up. The troll turned to face him, small, angry eyes. Harry looked up at it. "Go," he said to Ron and Hermione without looking away from the troll. "Harry," Hermione's voice. "I'm fine, go to the door." He heard them move. The troll took a step toward him, and Harry moved with it, not backward, laterally, keeping himself between the troll and his friends, making himself the problem. The troll swiped at him with one vast arm, and Harry ducked it cleanly and moved again. He was aware, distantly, that his wand was in his back pocket, and that he'd been practicing Wingardium Leviosa, and that this was a reasonable moment to try it, except that he was also aware the spell might not work reliably yet, and the troll was not going to wait for him to build confidence. So he did this instead. He took one of the sink taps Ron had left on the floor, wound up, and threw it at the troll's face with the precise, clean force of someone who'd spent years throwing things with Clark Kent watching and commenting on form. It hit the troll directly in the nose with a crack that echoed off the tiles. The troll sat down very suddenly. Then it fell sideways, very slowly, with the majestic inevitability of a large tree, and hit the floor with a crash that shook the mirrors off the wall. Silence. Harry looked at the troll, then at the troll's nose, which was bleeding impressively, then at Ron and Hermione in the doorway. "Are you both okay?" he said. Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You threw a tap at it," she said. "It worked," Harry said. "You threw a tap," Ron said, sounding genuinely awed. "I really did," Harry agreed. He checked the troll again, out cold, not dead, breathing in the way of something that had taken a significant impact and would wake up angry, and then looked at the state of the bathroom and then at the door where, right on cue, footsteps were arriving. McGonagall came first, followed by Snape, followed by Quirrell. McGonagall's face cycled through several positions on the disapproval dial before settling on something that was trying very hard not to be impressed. Snape assessed the troll and the room with a quick professional scan. Quirrell looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Something in Quirrell's face, just for a moment, just at the corner of the eyes, was not nervous, was not the anxious stammering professor, was something older and colder and very specifically focused. Harry filed that away. "Would someone like to tell me," McGonagall said in the voice that could cut glass, "what precisely happened here?" Ron and Harry both started to speak. Hermione, to Harry's surprise, spoke first. "It's my fault, Professor," she said, with a composure that was clearly costing her something. "I went looking for the troll. I thought I could deal with it from what I'd read. Harry and Ron came to help me when they realized I wasn't at the feast." She kept her chin up, her voice was steady. "They saved my life." McGonagall looked at her for a long reading moment, then at the troll, then at Harry, who was standing in the middle of the bathroom looking entirely calm. 5 points to Gryffindor," she said, "for presence of mind, and 5 each to Mr. Weasley and Mr. Kent for," she paused, "remarkable resourcefulness." She fixed Harry with a gaze over the rim of her glasses. "And perhaps you might show slightly more regard for school rules than for remarkable resourcefulness in future." "I'll consider it," Harry said seriously. Something in McGonagall's expression shifted very slightly, just at the corners, just for a moment. "See that you do," she said, and turned to deal with the troll. Quirrell had already left the bathroom. Harry had noticed this. Outside in the corridor, while Snape was busy inside, Hermione grabbed Harry's arm. Her grip was tight, still running on adrenaline, processing it. "Thank you," she said. "Obviously," Harry said. "I mean it. You could have, I know." He looked at her. "You were doing fine, actually. You just needed another option." Hermione stared at him. Then, in a slightly different voice, "How did you know I was in the bathroom?" "I pay attention," Harry said. "To me specifically. To everything," Harry said. "But yes." Ron was standing to the side with his hands in his pockets, watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching something settle into place. "So," he said, "friends." Hermione looked at him. Her expression traveled several miles in about half a second. "I suppose," she said, with dignity that was already beginning to soften into something more genuine. "Good," Ron said. "Because Harry clearly needs supervision, and I can't do it alone." Harry laughed. "That's extremely fair," he said. The three of them walked back through the corridor toward the tower, and something clicked into configuration between them as they walked, some alignment that felt less like a choice and more like a discovery, the recognition that a thing that was supposed to exist had just found its shape. The letter arrived on a Saturday morning, a week after the troll. Clark's handwriting, clear, unhurried, the handwriting of a man who still filed physical notes. "Harry, everything you said about the castle, I believe. The building I grew up in had something like that, according to my mother, the old farmhouse in Kansas. It breathed differently in spring. Lois says congratulations on finding the follow-up question, and to tell you she expects a full briefing when you're home at Christmas. She also says if you're finding trouble already, try to find it in a survivable order. I talked to Mrs. Fig again. She told me some things about the year Voldemort disappeared. I want you to be careful about. I don't mean hide. I don't mean play small. I mean keep your eyes open. The people around you have spent 11 years building a story about what you are. Don't let the story make decisions for you. You're the one who decides what Harry Kent means, not the prophecy, not the history, not Dumbledore. You, the apartment is quiet." Archie got into the neighbor's bird feeder again. "Dad, P.S. The treacle tart comment was cruel. I'm keeping it anyway." Harry read it twice, folded it, put it in the drawer of his nightstand next to the photograph. He looked out the window at the grounds, where frost was beginning to make the grass formal and geometric in the early morning light, and thought about stories and who got to write them. Then he got up, got dressed, and went to find Ron and Hermione, because there was a restricted section of the library that Hermione had been circling for 2 weeks, and he thought today was the day they should go in. Not to be reckless, just to see. His dad would understand. Chapter 4, The weight of what's hidden. The restricted section smelled like old decisions. That was Harry's first thought when Hermione finally cracked the problem of getting in. She'd found a loophole in the library's access rules involving medical necessity, and a very specifically worded note from Professor Sprout about research for herbology extra credit, which was not exactly dishonest, but was several miles from the whole truth. Harry appreciated the elegance of it. The section sat behind a velvet rope at the back of the library, and the books in it had the quality of things that had been deciding things for a long time. Some of them had locks. One of them had what appeared to be teeth. "We're looking for anything about protection magic," Harry said, scanning the spines. "Specifically old magic, pre-wand era if there's a category." "Why pre-wand?" Hermione asked, already pulling a book and opening it with the careful reverence she gave all books, including ones that might bite. "Because whatever my mother did to protect me wasn't wand magic," Harry said. "She was wandless when it happened. There wasn't time." He moved along the shelf, reading. "Old magic doesn't need intent in the same way. It needs truth." Ron was standing by the entrance, keeping watch with the alertness of someone who'd grown up with Fred and George and understood that lookout duty was a serious professional responsibility. He glanced back. "How do you know all this?" "My dad read everything he could find about it," Harry said, "and then I read everything he'd found." "Your dad researches dark magic," Ron said. "My dad researches anything that might affect me," Harry said. "He's thorough." Hermione looked up from her book with an expression that had been appearing more frequently lately, the one where she was recalibrating Harry's category for the 4th or 5th time. "Do you know what the protection actually was?" "Technically, love," Harry said without irony, because Clark had always been direct about it and directness seemed like the right approach. "My mother choosing to die for me created a protection that Voldemort couldn't cross. He tried to kill me and it reflected back on him." He paused, reading a spine that said sacrificial enchantments and their aftermath. "That's the what. I want to know the how, because if I understand how it works, I understand what I am." "You mean why the curse didn't kill you?" Hermione said slowly. "I mean why it left a mark instead," Harry said, touching the scar without thinking about it. "Something transferred. I want to know what." He pulled sacrificial enchantments from the shelf. It fell open in his hands to a page that seemed too convenient to be accidental, and he looked at it for a long moment, reading quickly, and went still. "What?" Hermione said, watching him. "Nothing," Harry said. "Not yet." He closed the book. "I need to read this properly. Let's take what we can and go." He tucked the book under his arm. His face was calm, behind the calm, something had shifted, not fear exactly. More like the feeling of a picture coming into focus that you'd been seeing only in fragments, and the complete image being larger than you'd expected. He'd need to write to his dad tonight. December arrived like a door closing, cold and definitive, and Hogwarts decorated itself for Christmas with an enthusiasm that suggested the castle genuinely enjoyed the season. 13 enormous trees appeared in the Great Hall overnight, enchanted to drop snow in specific patterns, and the suits of armor had been taught to sing carols, which they did with more volume than musical accuracy. Most students went home. Harry didn't. He could have, Clark had offered, and the offer had been genuine and not performatively selfless, which was a thing Harry'd learned to check for. But he wanted to stay. He wanted to see what the castle was like with echoes in the halls and time to think. Ron stayed because Harry was staying. This was not said, but it was clear. Hermione went home for Christmas but left Harry with 3 books, 2 pages of organized notes, and a very specific instruction about which sections to cross-reference, which Harry found both touching and entirely characteristic. The day before Christmas, Harry went back to the 3rd floor corridor. He'd been thinking about it since September. The locked door that Dumbledore had specifically told students not to approach, which told you at least 2 things. 1, that whatever was there was real enough to be worth warning about, and 2, that Dumbledore wanted you to be afraid of it rather than curious about it. Harry's father had taught him that whoever controlled the framing of a thing controlled the thing. He didn't like being framed. The corridor was empty and dim. Harry walked its length quietly, hands in pockets, until he reached the door. He listened first, old habit, the habit of someone who'd spent enough time around real danger to understand that listening before looking was how you lived long enough to look. From the other side of the door, breathing, slow, deep, not quite in unison. 3 sources. And underneath that, very faint, the high, continuous sound of something magical in active operation. He thought about the conversation he'd had with Hagrid 2 weeks ago, in Hagrid's cabin over tea and rock cakes that were accurately named. Hagrid, who was loyal and warm and constitutionally incapable of deliberate deception, and who had therefore confirmed, without quite meaning to, that something had been moved from Gringotts Vault 713 on the same day Harry and Clark had visited Diagon Alley, and that whatever had been moved was now at Hogwarts. Harry stood at the door and thought about the Philosopher's Stone and Nicholas Flamel, and a mirror that Dumbledore had placed somewhere in this castle, and what all of it added up to. Then he went back to the tower, wrote a very detailed letter to his father, and had the most specific Christmas he'd ever had. Clark came in January. Not announced. Harry hadn't asked for announced. He'd just written to his dad about what he'd found and what he was thinking, the way he always did, and Clark had apparently decided that some conversations needed to happen in person. He arrived on a Saturday morning, walking up the path from the gates in a dark jacket with his hands in his pockets. Hair slightly disordered from what Harry suspected had been something faster than walking, looking entirely like a reporter from Metropolis who had no remarkable qualities whatsoever. Harry spotted him from the Gryffindor Tower window, recognized the posture, and was at the front doors before his father had reached the steps. They didn't make a big production of it. Clark put his hand on Harry's shoulder and looked at him for a moment in that way he had, the quick all-over assessment that was habit from years of caring what condition things were in, and then nodded once, satisfied. "You look good," Clark said. "I'm good," Harry said. "Come on. I want to show you the Great Hall before Dumbledore notices you're here." "I imagine he's already noticed," Clark said. "Probably," Harry agreed, "but let him come to us." Clark smiled. "Look at you," he said, quiet and pleased, and followed his son inside. The Great Hall got quiet when they walked through it. Not dramatically, not all at once, a table-by-table thing, conversations trailing off as people noticed the tall man in civilian clothes who moved through the hall with the ease of someone accustomed to large rooms and the attention of crowds. Harry walked beside him without comment, gestured to the enchanted ceiling, January gray, light snowfall, and watched his dad look at it. Clark stood for a moment with his head tilted back, and his eyes doing that thing where he was seeing at a different resolution than everyone else. Then he smiled, slow and real. "That's extraordinary," he said. "Right," Harry said. "How does it, magic?" Harry said, grinning. "Your tone of voice when you say that still gives me pause," Clark said. Ron materialized at Harry's elbow with the enthusiasm of someone who had heard a great deal about Clark Kent and had been building impressions for 4 months. He was slightly taller than Harry, which meant he had to look up at Clark, which he did with frankly evaluating eyes. "Ron Weasley," he said, putting his hand out. Clark shook it with the careful grip of a man who remembered to be gentle. "Clark Kent, Harry talks about you constantly," He doesn't talk constantly, Harry said. Every letter, Clark said. Ron said this, Ron did that. Ron's brothers once charmed a prefect badge too. That's private correspondence, Harry said. Ron was delighted. What did he say about the prefect badge? Nothing that can be used in evidence, Harry said. Clark was looking around the hall now with that particular attention Harry recognized from press briefings, the public version of Clark Kent, affable and easy, while behind the glasses the real version was cataloging everything. He was doing a sweep. Harry let him because it was useful. Your letter, Clark said, still easy-voiced, still looking at the ceiling. About the third floor. Yeah, Harry said. You went and looked. I listened from the outside, Harry said. Three-headed dog, something guarding below it. And a mirror. Dumbledore moved something called the Philosopher's Stone from Gringotts the same day we were there. It's here, and someone's been trying to get to it since October. Ron, who knew most of this, was still nodding along seriously. Clark absorbed it in silence. Quirrell, Harry said. Clark looked at him then, direct, full attention. He's not what he presents, Harry said. The stutter is performance. The fainting in the Great Hall was a second too late, and his turban, Harry paused. There's something under it, I don't know what, but the way he looks at me isn't curiosity. It's recognition. Clark was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet that Harry had learned growing up meant he was being very careful about what he said next. You think Voldemort is involved. I think Voldemort never entirely went away, Harry said. And I think whoever's been hosting him has been close to me since September, and I think Dumbledore knows more about this than he's said to anyone. Clark looked at his son for a moment. Ron was very still beside them, listening. How do you want to handle it? This was the thing. This was the specific thing that Harry had spent 11 years understanding about his father, that he checked before making declarations, before giving instructions. How do you want to handle it? Not what he thought should be done, not what the prophecy said, what Harry wanted. I want to finish the year, Harry said. I want to understand what I'm dealing with. I'm not ready to act yet. He held his father's gaze. But I want to know you know. I know, Clark said quietly. And I want to talk to Dumbledore, Harry said. With you there, Clark nodded once. Let's do that, he said and straightened. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a gargoyle that leapt aside at the password lemon drop, which told you something about Dumbledore if you were inclined to read character through trivia, and was a remarkable room full of whirring silver instruments and portraits of sleeping headmasters, and a large bird on a perch that Harry identified immediately as a phoenix, and found himself genuinely moved by, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate. Dumbledore was standing when they arrived, which meant he'd expected them, which meant he'd been watching. He smiled at Harry with genuine warmth. Harry had decided in September that Dumbledore's warmth was real, that the complication wasn't that it was false, but that it coexisted with calculation in a way that made it complicated to trust. Then he looked at Clark, and something in his expression shifted, recalibrated. Mr. Kent, he said, I've been hoping we might meet. I've been waiting for you to reach out, Clark said pleasantly, sitting down in the offered chair with his hands on his knees. It's been 10 years, Dumbledore paused just fractionally. I was uncertain of the circumstances. You knew where Harry was within 18 months of my finding him, Clark said, still pleasant. Mrs. Figg knew, which means you knew. I left contact information. He met the old man's eyes across the desk. I understand why you didn't call, but I want you to understand that I know why, too. Harry sat beside his father and watched Dumbledore absorb this. The headmaster had very good control of his expression, but he'd apparently not been prepared for someone to sit down and put all the cards on the table quite that straightforwardly. You were building towards something, Clark continued. You had a plan for Harry, a role you needed him to play. A boy raised in certain circumstances, coming to this world at 11 without context, without confidence, without someone in his corner who understood what was really happening. He tilted his head very slightly. That's not a criticism. I understand you're fighting a war with the tools you have, but I need you to understand that Harry isn't a tool. He's my son. The room was very quiet. The silver instruments whirred softly. Fawkes the Phoenix watched Clark with interested amber eyes. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. When he spoke, his voice had lost one layer of performance and gained one layer of genuineness. You're right, he said. Clark seemed to have expected a longer negotiation. He blinked once slightly. I am an old man who has been fighting a long war, Dumbledore said, and I have made the mistake many times of seeing the board rather than the people on it. Harry has always been in my mind the solution to a problem. He looked at Harry directly. That has caused him harm, even in my good intentions. Harry looked back at him. I know about the prophecy, he said. Dumbledore was still for a moment. How much? Enough, Harry said. Neither can live while the other survives. I've been thinking about what that means since I found the reference in October. He kept his voice even. I'm not angry about it. I don't think you invented Voldemort to give me a destiny, but I want to be clear about something. He leaned forward slightly. The prophecy doesn't get to make my choices. It describes what might happen. I decide what happens. Something in Dumbledore's face, under the wisdom and the weariness and the calculation, did something unexpected. It softened, not into sentimentality, into something more like relief. Your mother said something remarkably similar, he said quietly. Not about a prophecy, but about choice. She was very clear that love was not something that happened to you. It was something you decided to do. Harry held this for a moment. Then, tell me about the stone. Dumbledore looked at him, then at Clark, then back at Harry. And he did. They were in the office for 2 hours. Clark asked questions, the kind of questions Harry recognized as the questions of someone who was building the full picture, not just the flattering angle of it. He asked about the Horcrux theory, which Dumbledore confirmed with visible reluctance and then visible determination to be complete. He asked about the protection in Harry's blood, and Dumbledore explained it carefully, and Clark listened with the patience of a man who had once spent 6 hours floating in the upper atmosphere working through a problem, and said, at the end of it, so you need Harry alive. Yes, Dumbledore said, and you need Voldemort's piece of soul that's in Harry removed eventually, which requires a death, Dumbledore said, and his voice was very measured, or what appears to be one. I hope that the protection in Harry's blood, activated by his own death, would destroy the piece inside him and allow him to return. The sacrifice magic, you hope, Clark said. I believe, Dumbledore said, there is a difference. Not from where I'm sitting, Clark said, without heat, without anger, just the flat statement of a man who found insufficient certainty unacceptable when the subject was his child. Dad, Harry said. Clark looked at him. No, Harry said, but let him finish. Clark looked at his son for a long moment, something moving through his expression that Harry'd seen before, this particular combination of love and the genuine difficulty of letting someone be their own person when every instinct said hold on tighter. He leaned back. Okay. Dumbledore watched this with an expression that was, for the first time, openly and uncomplicated moved. He's extraordinary, he said quietly, meaning Harry. I know, Clark said. I've always known. Harry looked at the phoenix on its perch. Fawkes looked back and made a low, melodious sound, something between a note and a question. Harry held out his hand on instinct, and Fawkes tilted its head and stepped from the perch onto Harry's arm with the careful deliberateness of an animal deciding something, settling its warm weight. Dumbledore stared. What? Harry said. He doesn't do that, Dumbledore said, with first-year students. He can if he wants to, Harry said reasonably, and stroked the bird's feathers with one finger, and Fawkes closed its eyes and made another sound, long and resonant, that filled the office the way music filled a good room. Something in Harry's chest loosened, not that anything had been tight exactly, but the sound undid something, reached into some place that normal things didn't reach and simply opened it. He thought about his mother. He thought about her choosing. He thought about love as a decision. He handed Fawkes back to Dumbledore, who received the bird with the air of a man being corrected by the universe. I'll find out what Quirrell is hiding, Harry said. When I do, I'll tell you. He stood. But the stone needs to be dealt with before then. If Quirrell gets to it, I have protections in place, Dumbledore said. I know, Harry said. I've worked out what most of them are. He glanced at his father. I've been thorough. Clark pinched the bridge of his nose under the glasses in the way of a parent who was deeply proud and also slightly exhausted by their own child, and stood. You'll keep him informed, Clark said to Dumbledore. This was not a question. I will, Dumbledore said, with the measured weight of someone making a genuine promise rather than a social commitment. I should have, from the beginning. That was my error. He looked at Harry. I'm sorry, Harry, for the version of you I was planning for. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then, figure out how to destroy the Horcruxes when the time comes. That's what matters, Dumbledore nodded. They left. In the spiral staircase, Clark put his hand on Harry's shoulder briefly. Harry covered it with his own hand and they went down. Ron and Hermione were waiting in the corridor outside the gargoyle with the studied casualness of people who had absolutely not been standing there listening and would maintain this position under any questioning. Clark looked at them both. Ron, he said. Mr. Kent, Ron said. Thanks for looking out for him. Ron looked briefly overwhelmed. He mostly looks out for himself, he said. I know, Clark said, but thanks anyway. Hermione stepped forward with her hand out and a very organized expression. Hermione Granger, she said. I have questions about what Harry told me about Krypton if that's. Hermione, Harry said. Just a few questions, Hermione. Specifically the solar energy absorption model and whether it, Another time, Clark said, shaking her hand with a smile that Harry could tell was genuine. Hermione was exactly the kind of person Clark liked, the kind who organized the world into questions and then went looking for the answers. I promise. Hermione subsided, satisfied by the promise. They walked the grounds until dark, all four of them. Clark listening to Ron talk about Quidditch and Hermione talk about library politics, and Harry walked slightly ahead, sometimes the way he did when he was thinking, and Clark watching him from the corner of his eye with the quiet, private attention of a parent who was learning a slightly new version of their child with every passing month. At the gates when it was time to go, Clark pulled Harry aside while Ron and Hermione tactfully inspected a nearby hedge. "How are you really?" Clark asked. "Really good," Harry said and meant it. "It's a lot. There's a lot that's happening that's complicated, but I feel right. Like I'm where I'm supposed to be. That's all I wanted to know," Clark said. "All right," Harry said. "More often," Clark said. "Dad, more often," Clark said again and pulled him in, and Harry let himself be held for a moment in the way he only allowed with his father, purely and without calculation, just warm and sure and real. "Okay," Harry said, muffled slightly by the jacket. "More often." Clark let him go, stepped back, put his hands in his pockets. "Be careful," he said. "Obviously," Harry said, and Harry turned back. "Whatever's under that turban," Clark said quietly, "you're not afraid of it, but be smart about when you're not afraid. Fear is useful information even when you don't feel it." Harry nodded. "I know," Clark nodded. And then he was just gone, not visibly. He wasn't going to fly from the school gates, but walking back down the path toward Hogsmeade and whatever route he'd take from there. Harry watched him go until the dark swallowed him. Ron appeared beside him. "Your dad's something," he said. "Yeah," Harry said. "He really loves you," Ron said, with the simple sincerity of someone from a large family for whom love was always stated plainly. "Yeah," Harry said again. He turned back toward the castle, which was lit from within, warm against the winter dark, towers reaching up into a sky going purple at the edges. "Come on. Hermione's probably found another restricted text we need to look at." "Definitely has," Ron said, and they went back inside. Later, much later, when the tower was quiet and Ron was asleep, and the fire had settled to red coals, Harry sat on his bed with Sacrificial Enchantments open in his lap, at the page he'd found in December, and read it again. The passage was dense and academic, written for someone who already understood the theory, and what it said was this: that a sacrificial protection created in love did not merely protect the subject, it transferred. A fragment of the sacrificing soul, or something like a soul in the old language, the word meant self rather than soul specifically, passed into the surviving child, became part of them. His mother was in him, not metaphorically, not as memory, in him. Her love was a structural component of what he was. He thought about the scar and the connection to Voldemort, and what the book in the restricted section had said about parasitic soul fragments, and what Dumbledore had confirmed today in careful, painful words. He thought about all of it for a very long time, sitting with it, the way Clark had taught him to sit with hard things rather than react to them. Then he put the book away, lay down, and looked at the ceiling. He was not afraid. He was very clear about what needed to be done. He was his mother's son and his father's son, and neither of those things required him to die unless he chose to, and he was not choosing to, not yet, not before he understood everything completely. He closed his eyes. Somewhere under a turban 3 floors below, something old and cold was waiting. Harry was patient. He could wait too. Chapter 5. Face to face. The exams ended on a Thursday. Harry sat his last paper, History of Magic, which was the academic equivalent of a long and dignified nap, and walked out of the great hall into June sunlight that fell warm and clean across the courtyard, and stood for a moment just breathing it. Around him, students scattered in all directions, the fizzing energy of people released from pressure, voices raised in relief and complaint, and the specific joy of being done. Ron emerged beside him and immediately flopped backward onto a patch of grass with his arms spread, staring at the sky. "Never again," he announced. "You'll do it again in June next year," Hermione said, sitting down neatly beside him with a parchment she was already reviewing. "I'm aware," Ron said. "Never again anyway." Harry didn't sit. He was watching the castle doors across the courtyard, where Quirrell had emerged, and was now standing in the shadow of the archway with his face turned away, apparently looking at nothing. He'd been doing this more frequently in the past 2 weeks, standing at the edges of things, watching, distracted in a way that Harry read as a man approaching a decision. "He's going tonight," Harry said quietly. Ron opened one eye. "Who is Quirrell?" Harry kept his voice down. Hermione had looked up from her parchment. "He's going for the stone tonight. I can see it in how he's moving. He's done waiting." Hermione looked at Quirrell across the courtyard, then at Harry. How can you tell from here? He's been right-handed all year, Harry said. His turban adjustment is always a right-hand motion. This past week he's been favoring his left without noticing it. Something on his right side is causing him discomfort, getting worse. He paused. Whatever's attached to him is getting stronger, which means it's getting more desperate. Silence. Ron had sat up. We need to go tonight, Harry said. Harry, Hermione began. I know what you're going to say, Harry said. He turned to look at them both. I know we could tell a teacher. I know the responsible thing technically is to let the adults handle it. He held Hermione's gaze. But I know what's down there, and I know what I can do, and if Quirrell gets to the stone before anyone else acts, Voldemort comes back. Tonight, and then nothing we do at any point this year matters. Hermione held his gaze for a long moment. Something moved through her expression, the internal argument of someone whose instinct was rules and whose developing conviction was people. People 1, what do we need? Whatever you've worked out about the protections, Harry said. Tell me what you know. Hermione had notes. Of course she had notes. She'd been quietly working on this since November, in parallel with Harry, and watching them compare information across the next 2 hours was like watching 2 different satellite systems map the same terrain, the same topography from different angles, combining into something more complete than either had separately. Devil's Snare. A room of enchanted keys, a giant chessboard, a logic puzzle with potions, the mirror, and Fluffy at the top, which Harry had been inside his head about since December and had resolved. Music, he said. Fluffy sleeps when it hears music. How do you know that? Ron asked. Hagrid mentioned it in November and I filed it away, Harry said. I file things. You are exhausting in the best possible way, Ron said with the sincerity of a close friend. They went after midnight. The castle at this hour had a different quality, not haunted, nothing so dramatic, just itself stripped of the business of the day, old and deep and breathing in its own rhythm. Harry moved through it with the comfort of someone who'd learned its nighttime patterns months ago, its creaks and the specific silences that preceded the movement of staircases. Ron and Hermione followed close, Hermione with her wand lit at a careful angle, Ron with his jaw set in the expression Harry had come to recognize as his particular form of courage, not fearless, just moving anyway. The third-floor corridor was dark. Fluffy was audible through the door, 3 separate rhythms of breathing, slightly out of phase with each other. Harry pushed the door open, and the 3 heads turned toward them, all 6 eyes catching the wand light. Harry reached into his bag and took out a small wooden flute he'd borrowed from the music room because he'd planned this part. He put it to his lips and played, which was not something he was exceptionally skilled at, but it didn't need to be a concert. Within 30 seconds, all 3 heads were drooping. In 90, Fluffy was on the floor, a mountain of snoring fur. Go, Harry said and lifted the trapdoor. The drop was longer than expected. Hermione went first, then Ron, then Harry. He heard them land in something soft below and let himself fall after them, landing easily, and then stood up and looked around. Devil's Snare everywhere. He could see it already reacting to Ron's movement, the tendrils beginning to constrict. Hermione had already worked out the spell, the light spreading upward from her wand and the plant recoiling. She cast it twice, 3 times, clearing enough space for all 3 of them to stand. Nice, Harry said. I practiced, Hermione said, slightly breathless but composed. The key room was extraordinary, thousands of winged keys circling in the dark and 3 broomsticks on the floor, and a lock that clearly needed the right one. Ron found the brooms first. Harry was already looking at the keys. It's old, Harry said, pointing at the lock mechanism. Older than most of the castle additions. Which means the matching key is going to look different from the others, probably worn on one side from years of use before they enchanted it to fly. He scanned the swarm. There, broken feather, left wing, blue shimmer. He was on the broom and had the key in his hand in about 40 seconds. Ron, beside him, was watching with the expression of someone who'd grown up with excellent Quidditch players in his family and had just watched something that wasn't technically Quidditch, but used the same muscles. You are trying out next year, Ron said. One thing at a time, Harry said and unlocked the door. The chessboard was where Ron became the story. Harry stood at the edge of it and assessed it with honest respect. It was a real problem, a genuine one, the kind that his strengths didn't particularly address. He was not a chess player. He was decent at it in the way he was decent at everything he'd put moderate effort into. But this wasn't moderate. This was a game of castle-scale pieces on a life-size board with very clear implications. Ron looked at it for about 10 seconds and then said, I can get us across. You sure? Harry said. No, Ron said, but I can see it. Give me a minute. Harry gave him the minute. Watched Ron walk the edge of the board, head slightly tilted. eyes moving in the particular unfocused way that meant he was seeing the whole thing rather than individual pieces. This was the thing about Ron that Harry had been learning since September, that he had his own kind of intelligence, spatial and tactical, that didn't announce itself the way Hermione's did but was just as real. Ron played them across. He was the knight. Harry watched him move and felt something tight in his chest that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the specific pain of watching a friend do something that might cost them. It did cost him. The White Queen took Ron's piece with a strike that sent him sprawling, and Harry was across the board and beside him in seconds, and Ron was conscious and angry and waving him off. "I'm fine," Ron said, and he mostly was dazed, one arm held at an angle that suggested it hurt. "Go, I'll wait here. Go get the stone." Harry. Ron looked up at him with the steady clarity of someone who had worked this out before they even entered the trapdoor. "You're the one who needs to be there. Go." Hermione crouched beside Ron, already pulling ingredients from her bag with the practical competence of someone who'd packed for exactly this contingency. She looked up at Harry. "Go," she said. "I'll take care of him. Go." Harry looked at both of them. Ron and Hermione in a life-size chess room at midnight, which was not any kind of outcome Harry would have written, and yet here they were, and they were being exactly themselves. "Thank you," Harry said, and meant all of it. "Don't thank us," Ron said. "Just deal with it." Harry went. The potion room was the last one before the mirror chamber. 7 bottles, a logic puzzle, a riddle in verse on a piece of parchment. Harry read the riddle once, identified the correct bottle by process of elimination from the 3 given constraints, drank what was an objectively minuscule amount of liquid that tasted like frost and metal, and was through the black flame barrier before the room had time to feel dramatic. On the other side, the mirror room and Quirrell. The professor was standing in front of a tall mirror with an ornate gold frame, hands clasped behind his back, staring into it with the frustrated intensity of someone who could see what they wanted and couldn't reach it. He didn't turn around when Harry entered. Harry didn't expect him to. Quirrell had known Harry was coming since the trapdoor, probably, the way Harry had known about him since September. They had been, in a sense, moving toward this all year. "I wondered," Quirrell said, "when you'd come." "Here I am," Harry said. Quirrell turned. The stutter was gone completely now. What looked back at Harry from Quirrell's face was not the anxious professor, but something stripped of the performance, something colder and more direct, and Harry looked at it with the steady attention he brought to things that deserved it. "The mirror," Quirrell said. He looked tired. Not the tiredness of a man at the end of a long day, the tiredness of a man being consumed. There were shadows under his eyes that were deeper than shadows, a quality to his skin that was wrong. "I can see the stone in it. I can see my hands holding it, but I cannot reach it." He looked at Harry. "You should be able to. Dumbledore's enchantment. Someone who wants to find the stone but not use it." His mouth twisted. "You would qualify." "Probably," Harry agreed. He was looking at the mirror. It was remarkable, the gold frame elaborate with carved figures that shifted when you watched them sideways, the glass surface perfectly reflective, something about it that made the air feel heavier, more significant. He could see himself in it. Harry Kent, 11 years old in his school robes, standing in a stone room under a Scottish castle at midnight, and in the reflection's pocket a glimmer, just a glimmer. He did not step toward it. "You're not going to get it from me," Quirrell said. This was not a question. "No," Harry said. "Then I'll have to take it from you." Quirrell's wand was out. "I didn't want it to be this way." "You've been trying to kill me since September," Harry said. "The broom incident at the Quidditch match. The troll, you let it in, that was you." "Not kill," Quirrell said, and the distinction seemed genuine to him in a way that Harry found more disturbing than a straightforward yes. "Discourage, redirect." A pause, a brief convulsion of something that crossed his face. "He wanted you removed more permanently." I disagreed. "Why?" Harry asked honestly. Quirrell was quiet for a moment. "Because I think," he said carefully, "that you're not what any of us expected, and I still have enough of myself left to find that interesting." Another convulsion, stronger. "He disagrees." "Who disagrees?" Harry said, and kept his voice even because he already knew and he wanted to hear it said. Quirrell reached up and unwound his turban. Harry had read about Voldemort. He'd read everything he could find because that was how he operated, and the record was comprehensive. The rise, the reign, the disappearance, the years of silence. He'd built a picture in his head of someone who had chosen to be a monster as a deliberate philosophical position, who had remade himself in service of an idea about power and death and the refusal of both. He had not precisely imagined a face on the back of someone else's head. It was still recognizably a face. Pale beyond pale, red-eyed, the features collapsed inward the way faces looked when something essential had been removed. It opened its eyes and looked at Harry with an intelligence that was still there, still sharp, still burning with something Harry recognized as will, nothing physical, just the concentrated force of a person who had decided not to stop. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, thin and high and absolute. At last. "Harry Kent," Harry said. A pause. "Excuse me, my name is Harry Kent," Harry said and walked toward the mirror, not toward Voldemort. Toward the mirror because he'd worked out in the corridor outside that the most useful thing he could do right now was get the stone, and standing still while Voldemort re-established the frame of the conversation was not useful. "Stop," Voldemort said. Harry looked into the mirror. His reflection looked back. The glimmer in the pocket was brighter now up close. He could see the shape of it, small and red, and he understood the enchantment then completely. Want it but not use it. He wanted it in the sense that he wanted Voldemort not to have it, which was not the same as wanting it for power, which meant he felt the stone drop into his actual pocket. He kept his face still. "Turned around, step aside," Voldemort said. "Give me the stone. I have no quarrel with you, not really. You tried to kill me when I was 15 months old," Harry said. "I acted on information," Voldemort said with the particular chilling reasonableness of someone for whom murder was an administrative category. "The prophecy. I am not, whatever you may have been told, cruel for cruelty's sake. I am practical. You were described as a threat. I addressed it. And my mother." Harry said, not with heat, with the deliberate, exact weight of a specific question. Voldemort's red eyes didn't flinch. "She was given the option to stand aside. She chose not to," Harry said. "She chose poorly," Voldemort said. Harry looked at him for a moment. Really looked the way he looked at things when he was deciding what they were. He'd expected rage maybe from himself, the specific kind that came from being told your mother's greatest act was poor judgment. Instead he felt something else, something clearer. "She chose you couldn't understand," Harry said. "That's the problem, isn't it? You split your soul. You made yourself less human every time. And now you literally can't process what she did, because the part of you that would understand it is gone." He tilted his head. "That's not power, that's damage." The silence in the room was very specific. "Give me the stone," Voldemort said, and the voice was the same but something in it had changed. A register that hadn't been there a moment ago, something closer to heat. "No," Harry said. "Quirrell," Voldemort said. Quirrell raised his wand. Harry had been watching Quirrell throughout this conversation, in his peripheral vision, tracking him the way Clark had taught him to track multiple things at once, your focus on the conversation, your awareness on the room. He saw the wand come up before it was fully raised and moved, not dramatically. He stepped left, inside Quirrell's wand arm and pushed the arm up and to the side, a simple redirect, the geometry of it clean. The killing curse that Quirrell fired went into the ceiling in a flash of green light and a crack of stone, and Harry held Quirrell's wrist. The reaction was instant and violent. Quirrell screamed. Not a pain scream, a burning scream, the specific sound of something going wrong that was wrong in a way that went deeper than surface. Harry felt it too, his palm, his fingers. The skin of his hand where it made contact with Quirrell's wrist was getting hot, and then hotter, and then too hot, in a way that should have hurt him and didn't quite, as if his body was deciding what to do with the information. Quirrell's wrist was beginning to blister. Harry let go, stepped back. Looked at his own hand, unmarked, warm, nothing permanent. Quirrell was gasping, looking at his wrist with an expression that had broken open into something rawer than anything he'd shown all year. Fear, real fear not performed. "What are you?" he started. "My mother's protection," Harry said quietly. He understood it now, with sudden and absolute clarity, reading it the way you read something you'd half understood for months and suddenly saw complete. "It's still in me. As long as it's in me, you can't touch me in live." "Then we have a problem," Voldemort said, and his voice was very controlled, "because Quirrell is all I have and you are all that stands between me and a body." "Yes," Harry said, "we do." He looked at Quirrell, who was shaking, not entirely from pain, Harry thought from something else. The man behind the possession, the actual Quirrell, looking out through eyes that had been borrowed and blinking. There was something left in there, not much, but something. "You could stop," Harry said, to Quirrell specifically. Quirrell looked at him with the eyes of a man who'd made a series of small bad decisions that had compounded into something he couldn't get out of, which was different from the eyes of a man who'd chosen to be what he was. "I made a bargain," Quirrell said. "You can stop," Harry said. "It won't cost you less than this." "Quirrell," Voldemort said sharply. Quirrell raised his wand again, but his hand was shaking, and this time when he tried to form the incantation, his voice broke in the middle of it, and what came out was not a killing curse, but a gust of black smoke that hit the mirror and shattered it in a cascade of gold-framed glass. "That's enough," Voldemort said, and his voice was not addressing Quirrell. Harry felt it before he saw it, the temperature in the room dropping, the air going thin and strange, the quality of the light changing. Voldemort was leaving his host. Leaving Quirrell and coming out into the room, not into a body but into something between states, a face in smoke, a presence in cold air, nothing solid but nothing absent either. Quirrell dropped. Harry caught him. Instinct, pure instinct. The man fell and Harry moved and caught him without thinking about the burning. And the burning happened and Harry held on and lowered Quirrell to the ground as carefully as he could manage. Quirrell's eyes were open, looking at the ceiling, and there was something in them now that Harry didn't want to be the last thing anyone saw. "Don't be afraid," Harry said. Quirrell blinked. "I'm cold," he said, and his voice was his own. Whatever else had been in it was gone. "I know," Harry said. Quirrell closed his eyes. Harry stood up and turned to face Voldemort. The form he took was smoke and suggestion, a face in the cold air, the impression of eyes, nothing with hands or feet or anything physical. It circled the room with the slow, furious patience of something that had been denied repeatedly and was making calculations. "Give me the stone," Voldemort said. "I'll ask only this once more." "Why once more?" Harry said. "Because after this I'll have to try something else, and we'll both find that less interesting." "I'm not afraid of you," Harry said. "No," Voldemort said, and this was perhaps the most extraordinary thing he'd said all evening. Not a denial, not a dismissal, just acknowledgement, flat and factual. "I'm trying to understand that. I've been trying to understand it since September when your name came back to me." The smoke circled. Every other child would have been terrified. Every adult I've faced, at their best, their courage was a performance over fear. You are genuinely unafraid. Why? Harry considered the question honestly. "Because fear is information," he said. "You're telling me I should be afraid because you're powerful, but power isn't the same as threat. I've grown up around the most powerful person on Earth, and he spent every day teaching me that power is a tool, not a status. You're not a threat because you're powerful. You're a threat because you've made bad choices with power." He met the red eyes in the smoke. "And bad choices can be stopped." "I am Lord Voldemort," the smoke said, with the particular weight of a man who had rebuilt himself around a name and found the name sufficient. "You're Tom Riddle," Harry said, "who was afraid of dying and made himself into something that couldn't live properly instead." The temperature dropped so fast that Harry's breath clouded. The smoke compressed, drew inward, and the eyes in it went from red to something darker. "Don't," Voldemort said, and for the first time all evening the word had something personal in it. "I'm not saying it to hurt you," Harry said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and you need to hear true things from someone who isn't afraid to say them." He reached into his pocket and closed his hand around the stone. "You can't have this, and I'm not going to let you have it. Not because of a prophecy, because I've decided." The attack came without warning. It wasn't a spell, it was the spirit form itself, rushing forward with the compressed force of something that had nothing to lose, cold and absolute, and aimed at Harry's face, at his scar, at the point of connection between them. Harry didn't move back. He moved forward. He raised his hand with the stone in his fist, and he pushed, not with his wand, not with a spell, but with the thing that lived under his magic, the thing his mother had put in him, the foundational fact of him. He pushed with love, which he understood now not as sentiment, but as structure, as something load-bearing in the architecture of reality, and where it met Voldemort's cold force the air between them cracked like ice and filled with light. The light was gold. The same warm gold as the wand selecting him in Ollivander's, the same gold as the great hall ceiling at its best, the same gold as Clark's face when Harry had done something he was proud of and was trying not to show it. Voldemort screamed. It was not the sound of something being destroyed. Harry didn't want to destroy it, not tonight, not this way, not when there were Horcruxes still intact, and Voldemort could simply find another host. He wanted to drive it back, push it out of this space, out of this school, back into the non-life it had been occupying for 10 years. He pushed harder. The cold collapsed inward on itself, the smoke condensed, and then Voldemort, what Voldemort was right now, was moving through the wall and gone, and the room was just a room again, stone and dark and very cold, lit by the small flames that Quirrell had set earlier and that were still burning steadily at the edges. Harry stood in the middle of it with the stone in his hand and his hand glowing slightly, fading back to normal as he watched, and took a long breath. He looked at Quirrell. Still. He checked, no, not breathing. Harry knelt beside him for a moment. The man had been, at some point, before the bad decisions compounded, someone with enough love for knowledge to devote himself to it. That was worth marking. "I'm sorry," Harry said, which was not forgiveness and not condemnation, just acknowledgement. Then he stood up, put the stone in his pocket, and went to find his friends. Ron was up. Hermione had managed whatever she'd managed, and Ron was sitting against the chessboard wall with his arm in a makeshift sling, and his face the particular shade of pale that meant he was running on adrenaline and stubbornness. He looked at Harry when he came through the door, and the relief on his face was enormous and completely unguarded. "Well," Ron said. "Voldemort's gone," Harry said. "For now, Quirrell's dead." Ron absorbed this. "The stone," Harry held it up briefly. "I need to give it to Dumbledore." "Are you okay?" Hermione said. She was looking at his hand, the one that had touched Quirrell, the one that had held the stone, still slightly warm but unmarked. "Completely," Harry said. He was in the way that mattered. Something had happened in that room that he'd need weeks to fully understand. He could feel it, the experience sitting in him like something he'd swallowed whole that needed time to dissolve. But he was intact, and his friends were mostly intact, and Voldemort was not in possession of a body or a philosopher's stone. "Help me get Ron up," Harry said. "I can get up myself," Ron said, and immediately needed both of them. They walked back through the empty rooms, through the potion corridor, through the shattered remains of the key chamber, back up through the trapdoor where Fluffy was still deeply asleep, and into the third-floor corridor, and then into the castle proper. And the castle was very quiet, and the torches burned steady and warm, and Harry felt the building breathe around him in a way that seemed, just for a moment, like recognition. He took them to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey met them at the door with the expression of someone who'd expected exactly this, and found the confirmation both satisfying and deeply irritating. "Sit," she said, in a tone that brooked no discussion. They sat. When Dumbledore arrived 20 minutes later, Harry held out the stone without preamble. Dumbledore took it, looked at it in his palm for a long moment, and looked at Harry. "I was there," Harry said. "I heard what I needed to hear. You want to know what that was?" "I suspect I will," Dumbledore said quietly. "Sit down," Harry said, "and I'll tell you everything." Dumbledore sat. And Harry told him, and Hermione added details at precise moments, and Ron fell asleep against the hospital wing pillow with his arm in a proper sling, making a sound of deep and total peace, and the June night moved slowly toward morning outside the tall windows. He wrote to his father at dawn, sitting on the edge of his hospital bed while Hermione slept and Ron snored and the light came in pale and clean. "Dad, I met Voldemort. The real version, whatever's left of the real version. I want to tell you everything when I'm home. There's a lot to tell. I'm fine, more than fine. I understand some things now that I didn't understand before, about Mum, about what she did, about what it means. I'll explain when I see you. The stone is safe. Quirrell is dead. Voldemort is gone, but not gone. I wasn't afraid. He asked me why, actually, why I wasn't afraid. And I thought about what to say, and what I said was the truth. I've grown up around the most powerful person on Earth, and he spent every day showing me that power is a choice. You're the reason I wasn't afraid, Dad. I wanted you to know that. I'll be home in 2 weeks. Harry, he folded it, sealed it. Outside the window, the grounds were gold and still, and the black lake was a mirror for the early sky. Somewhere in there, the giant squid was doing whatever it did at dawn. Harry put the letter in his pocket to send when the owlery opened. He lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. 2 weeks until home. Until Metropolis in the apartment and Clark at the kitchen table with his coffee and the newspaper, probably already knowing most of what had happened, probably already planning to pretend he didn't so Harry could tell it himself. He smiled at the ceiling. Next year, he thought. More of this next year. More of Hogwarts and the castle and Hermione's notes and Ron's chess and the stars through the tower window. And meanwhile, Voldemort in whatever form he currently occupied, and Horcruxes to find, and Dumbledore learning how to have a different kind of conversation. A lot of work, good work. He closed his eyes and let the June morning come. Chapter 6, The Summer of Two Worlds. The train back to London was loud and bright and smelled like chocolate frogs and someone's leaking potion kit, and Harry sat in the compartment with his feet up and his head against the window, and let the Scottish landscape roll past him in long green waves. Ron was asleep within 20 minutes, which Harry had expected. The arm was healed. Madame Pomfrey had fixed the bone overnight with a thoroughness that left Ron mildly annoyed. There was nothing dramatic left to show for it, but the body kept its own ledger, and Ron had spent a week post-chess room walking slightly carefully, sleeping slightly longer, eating slightly more. His mother was going to take one look at him at King's Cross and know, Harry thought. Mothers who'd raised 7 children probably had a developed sense for the particular tiredness of someone who'd recently done something they weren't supposed to. Hermione was reading, which was not a surprise, but the book was fiction, which was, Harry looked at the cover, Jane Austen, which told him something about how Hermione was processing the last 2 weeks. She went to fiction when she needed to feel things she hadn't scheduled. He'd noticed this in April and filed it away. He turned back to the window. The thing about being on a train heading away from something was that you could feel the distance accumulating in a way that was different from leaving in other ways. Each mile of track was a mile of objective, measurable separation, and the thing you were leaving from stayed still while you moved, and somewhere in Scotland behind him, the castle was doing whatever castles did in summer, settling, breathing, waiting in the way of things that had been waiting centuries and found it natural. He was going to miss it. This surprised him slightly, the specific quality of missing it, which was not like missing his dad or Metropolis or any specific physical thing. It was more like the way you missed a state of being, that particular combination of constant discovery and deep belonging, the sense of being in a place that was right for you in a way that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with fit. He'd be back in September. That helped. Draco Malfoy appeared in the compartment doorway an hour north of London, which was either deliberate timing or coincidence, and Harry's assessment of Draco was that he didn't do coincidence. He was alone, which was new. No Crabbe, no Goyle, no audience. He stood in the doorway looking at Harry with the expression Harry had been cataloging all year, the one that had started as threat assessment and evolved into something he didn't quite have a name for. Not friendship, not hostility, something more honest than either. Mind, Draco said, with a tilt of his head at the empty seat. Harry looked at him for a moment, then at Ron asleep and Hermione, who had looked up from her book with an expression of suspended judgment. Go ahead, Harry said. Draco sat. He was quiet for a moment, looking out the same window Harry had been looking out, which gave Harry the opportunity to look at him directly. He looked, Harry thought, tired in a way that had nothing to do with exams. The particular tiredness of someone who'd spent a year performing expectations and was now in this specific buffer zone between the school year and home, briefly free of the performance. You knew about Quirrell, Draco said, not a question. Since September, Harry said. Draco absorbed this. You didn't say anything. I was working it out, Harry said, and I wanted to understand the whole picture before I moved. Draco looked at him sideways. My father said you'd be weak, easy to redirect. He seemed aware that the word wasn't quite right even as he said it. He had plans for how the year would go. Did they go that way? Harry said. No, Draco said, with a dryness that was the closest thing to humor Harry had seen from him all year. What does your father think now? He's reassessing, Draco said carefully. The word was doing a lot of work. Harry let it. He had information about who you were supposed to be, a version of you. Draco looked at him directly. That version doesn't exist. No, Harry agreed. Who is your father? Draco said. Actually, Clark Kent. I looked him up. He's a reporter. He is, Harry said, a reporter from Metropolis. Draco's voice was deliberate, turning it over. Who is also a reporter from Metropolis, Harry said evenly. Draco held his gaze. Something moved through his expression, the calculation of a boy who had been raised to understand that the shape of what people didn't say was sometimes more informative than what they said. Right, he said after a moment. A reporter. He's a good man, Harry said. The best I know. Draco was quiet again. Then your friend, Weasley. He told everyone you killed Quirrell. Quirrell died, Harry said. That's different. Most people aren't making the distinction. Most people weren't there, Harry said. He looked out the window. Quirrell made his choices, some of them bad, going back further than this year. What happened to him at the end was the consequence of those choices, not something I did to him. You sound like you've thought about it, Draco said. I've thought about it a lot, Harry said, and this was true. He'd spent the 2 weeks since the mirror room sitting with it, with the specific discomfort of being the last thing someone saw, with the question of whether different words might have made a different end. He'd come to a conclusion he was at peace with, but that didn't mean the thinking hadn't happened. Draco nodded slowly. He seemed to be working his way toward something, and Harry, who had infinite patience for people working their way toward things, waited. Next year, Draco said finally, might be different. Most years are, Harry said. Something in Draco's posture shifted, not much, not dramatically. A fraction of the performance dropped, and underneath it was something that looked like a second-year boy on a train trying to figure out how to want something different from what he'd been taught to want. Harry recognized the difficulty of that process and didn't comment on it. Some things were better witnessed than named. See you in September, Kent, Draco said and stood up. See you, Malfoy, Harry said. Draco left. Ron, who had apparently been awake for the last portion of this, opened one eye. That was weird, he said. He's figuring something out, Harry said. Good for him, Ron said, with the generous pragmatism of a person who had enough of his own figuring out to do and was willing to let others do theirs. He closed his eye. Wake me up at King's Cross. Obviously, Harry said. King's Cross was its usual beautiful chaos, the intersection of two worlds wearing the face of one, platform 9 3/4, sealed behind solid brick for anyone without the knowledge to walk through it. Harry came through with his trunk and his owl, who'd been profoundly displeased about the journey home, in the way of owls who formed strong opinions about baskets, and stepped into the noise and crowd of the Muggle platform. Clark was waiting by the barrier, not obviously. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the departures board with the unconcerned patience of someone who had nowhere to be, wearing the glasses he technically didn't need but wore because they were part of being Clark Kent in the world. He looked, from any reasonable distance, entirely ordinary. Harry knew his father's shape at any distance. He walked toward him and Clark turned before Harry had covered half the distance, which told you something about whose eyesight was really the issue with the glasses, and his face did what it always did when it saw Harry, something that was not quite a smile but contained the possibility of one, something warm and certain and just for Harry. "Hey," Harry said. "Hey," Clark said. They closed the remaining distance. Clark put one hand on Harry's shoulder, the way he always did, quick and firm, and looked at him in the full attention way for about 4 seconds. Assessment. Check. Then his hand moved to pull Harry in, brief and strong, and Harry went, and for a moment the noise of King's Cross was just background. "You're in one piece," Clark said. "Told you," Harry said into the jacket. "Letters are different from in person," Clark said. "I know." Harry stepped back. "I know." They looked at each other. There was a conversation available here about everything that had happened, about Quirrell and Voldemort, and the mirror room and the stone, and what Harry had understood in the cold light of that underground chamber about his mother's love and what it had made of him. All of that was available. Clark's face said clearly that he was ready for it, that he'd been ready for it since the last letter arrived. Harry said, "Can we get food first?" Clark exhaled slowly. "Yes," he said, with the specific relief of a man who'd been braced for an emotional conversation and been given a reprieve. "Absolutely yes." Ron appeared behind Harry, dragging his trunk with the resigned effort of someone who'd underestimated its weight and nearly collided with Clark's considerable presence. He looked up. "Up a bit more." "Oh," Ron said. "You're tall." "Ron Weasley," Clark said, with the particular warmth he reserved for people Harry had told him mattered. "It's really good to meet you." Ron shook the offered hand and then looked at it after, the way people sometimes did after shaking a hand that was very certain of itself. "Harry talks about you constantly," he said, with the identical phrasing Clark had used at the start of the year, and grinned the lopsided grin. "Constantly," Harry said firmly, "is an overstatement in both directions." Hermione emerged from the crowd with her parents, a pair of pleasant-faced adults who both wore the carefully composed expression of people who had spent the last year receiving letters about things that were outside their reference frame and had decided to embrace this as an adventure. Her mother hugged her immediately. Her father caught Harry's eye over Hermione's shoulder and gave him the nod of a man who'd heard the name and had opinions. Clark introduced himself and shook hands all around and made small talk with an ease that was genuinely one of his most remarkable skills, this ability to be fully present in ordinary social situations in a way that made everyone feel attended to, and Harry watched him do it and felt the particular warmth of seeing your parent be good at being a person. Mrs. Weasley descended on Ron from what felt like several directions simultaneously and held him at arm's length and looked at him and said, "You look thin," which Ron objected to, and then held him again, and Harry watched this and thought about love as a decision, and love as a structure, and love as the thing that made the difference between a curse and a scar. When they separated, Ron backed toward the red-haired crowd of his family, Hermione toward her parents' car, Neville toward a formidable-looking grandmother. Harry found himself walking beside his dad through the King's Cross crowd, trunk rolling behind him, owl swaying in its basket, people streaming past in all directions. "Lois wants a full debrief," Clark said. "Obviously," Harry said. "She said, and I'm quoting, 'Tell him I want everything, and I mean the parts he thinks aren't important because those are always the important parts.'" "That's extremely Lois," Harry said. "She also said she's bought the ingredients for the carbonara thing you like, so dinner's covered." "She didn't have to do that," Harry said, genuinely touched. "She knows," Clark said. "She did it anyway." He glanced sideways. "She also bought 3 books about wizarding history and has opinions about the International Statute of Secrecy that she'd like to share." "Of course she does," Harry said. They pushed through the station doors into London, afternoon light bouncing off glass and chrome and the particular blue of a city sky in June, and Harry stopped for a moment on the pavement and breathed it. Metropolis-adjacent air, diesel and sunshine, and something that was neither specifically but was the compound effect of people and roads and the ongoing busy project of a city being itself. "Welcome home," Clark said. "Good to be home," Harry said, and meant it completely. The apartment was the same. This should have been unremarkable. It had been less than a year. Nothing should have changed. Furniture didn't rearrange itself of its own accord in Metropolis the way it did at Hogwarts. But there was something about coming back to a space after a significant period away that made you see it newly, and Harry walked through the door and stopped just inside and looked at the kitchen table, the bookshelf, the particular quality of light through the west-facing windows in the afternoon. It was very Clark. Dark wood and organized bookshelves, and a kitchen that was clean because someone used it regularly and took care of things, and a study through the half-open door that smelled like paper and coffee, and the particular quiet of serious reading. One photograph on the mantelpiece, Harry at 9, on a beach in Cape Cod, squinting into the sun with his arms spread, clearly having just landed because his feet were an inch off the sand. Harry put his trunk in his room. His room unchanged, the galaxy map on the ceiling, the desk with the lamp that Clark had bought specifically for reading in low light, the window he'd climbed out of exactly once at 2 in the morning to float on the rooftop and look at the city, which Clark had known about and not mentioned until Harry brought it up himself. He sat on the bed, felt the mattress, the particular give of it. Home. He heard Clark in the kitchen, the sound of the kettle, the specific clink of the mugs he'd had for as long as Harry could remember. Harry pulled himself up, went through, sat at the table. Clark put tea in front of him, the right kind, the kind Harry had specified at age 7 after a period of extensive comparative research, and sat down across from him and wrapped both hands around his own mug and just looked. "Okay," Clark said. "Tell me," Harry told him. He told him everything, in the order it happened, which was how Clark had always asked for things, not summarized, not edited for relevance, in the order it happened because the sequence was part of the information. He told him about the mirror room and standing in front of Quirrell, about the stone dropping into his pocket, about the conversation with Voldemort. He told him about the cold air and the red eyes and what Voldemort had asked and what Harry had answered. Clark listened through all of it without interrupting, which was a thing Harry had been grateful for since childhood, his father's genuine, physical, attentive listening, the way he gave a conversation his full weight, which was considerable. When Harry finished, there was a silence of reasonable length. "You told him his fear of death was damage," Clark said. "Yes," Harry said, "and he asked you why you weren't afraid." "Yes." Clark looked at his tea. "What did you say?" "I told him you'd taught me that power was a choice, not a status." Harry held his father's gaze. "I meant it." Clark's jaw did the thing. Harry watched it happen, and this time found it moving rather than amusing, because he understood what it meant, that Clark was processing something larger than he was showing, in the way of a person who had learned to contain large things, because the alternative was overwhelming the room. "I nearly went," Clark said after a moment. "What? In January, after the visit, I nearly went back." He was looking at his hands. "I had the location worked out. I knew the route through the protections. It was a significant exercise in not acting on instinct." Harry looked at him. "Why didn't you?" "Because you didn't ask me to," Clark said, "and because I know the difference between a situation that needs me and a situation that needs you." He looked up. "This needed you." "It did," Harry said. "That didn't make it easier," Clark said. "No," Harry agreed, "but it was right." Clark nodded, picked up his tea, set it back down. "The Horcruxes," he said. "Dumbledore's working on it," Harry said. "He's been identifying them for years. He thinks there are 6, plus Voldemort himself makes 7. 6 separate objects." "I know," Harry said. "It's going to take time. But Dumbledore's been doing the groundwork, and I trust him to continue doing it." He paused. "More than I did before. We had a real conversation in the hospital wing after. When you take the chess away, he's honest. He's genuinely trying to do right by people. He's just been at war for so long that right by people and right for the strategy have gotten blurred. Can he separate them?" Clark said. "He's going to try," Harry said. "I told him he had to." A pause. "You told Dumbledore he had to," Clark said. "He agreed," Harry said. Clark looked at him for a long moment. Then he laughed quiet real, the laugh he had for things that were both astonishing and completely consistent with everything he should have expected. "Of course he did," he said. Lois Lane arrived at 6 o'clock with the carbonara ingredients, a bottle of wine for Clark, a sparkling water for Harry. "I know you're 11, but you might as well learn to appreciate nice things early," and the full force of her considerable personality, which in the Kent apartment felt like sunlight and static electricity, and the particular energy of a person who was always the most interesting version of themselves. She looked at Harry in the doorway and said, "You're taller." 10 months, Harry said. "Children are disturbing," Lois said, and walked past him into the kitchen. She cooked while Clark set the table, and Harry sat on the counter in the way that Clark technically didn't allow, and that Lois actively encouraged because she found it more useful to have Harry at eye level. She asked questions while she cooked, which was also her specific method, the interview while hands were occupied, because people answered more honestly when they weren't sitting across a table being asked. Tell me about Quirrell, she said, without preamble, dropping pasta into boiling water. Harry told her. Lois listened with one ear while she worked, and then turned fully when he got to the part about the turban, and stayed turned. And Dumbledore knew, she said. I think he suspected, Harry said carefully. Quirrell was a late hire. Dumbledore needed someone for the position and took someone he didn't have a long history with. I think he put the stone there partly as a trap. If someone went for it, they'd expose themselves. Using the stone as bait, Lois said. And using the school, Harry said. Including the students in it, Lois looked at him. How do you feel about that? Complicated, Harry said honestly. I understand the logic. I also think it was wrong. I told him so. He looked at his hands. He agreed. Whether that changes how he operates going forward, I'll see. That's mature, Lois said. Dad's fault, Harry said. Clark from the table. I'll take it. Lois pointed the wooden spoon at Harry. The wizard world is going to try to tell you what you are, she said. All year they've been building a story. Hero savior, chosen one, the boy who lived. She went back to the stove. You know what the chosen one narrative does to real people. Boxes them in, Harry said. Destroys them, Lois said without drama, because a story is a static thing and people aren't static. The moment you start living inside the narrative, you stop growing. She stirred. So don't. I'm not, Harry said. I know, Lois said. I'm telling you for the years when it's harder to remember. Write it somewhere. Harry considered this. The prophet who refuses the prophecy, he said. Lois pointed the spoon at him again, this time approvingly. Exactly. Clark brought glasses to the table and looked between them with the fond exasperation of a man who had brought two of his favorite people into the same room and was now experiencing the compound effect. Can we eat before the philosophical framework, please? The philosophical framework is ongoing, Lois said. We can do both. They did both. The days that followed settled into the specific rhythm of Kent's summer, which was Clark working from the apartment in the mornings and Harry reading. He'd brought 6 books home from Hogwarts and bought 4 more from a wizarding post-order catalog that delivered by owl, and afternoons that went wherever they went. Sometimes Metropolis, walking the city that Harry had grown up in, seeing it with eyes that had spent a year looking at the enchanted ceiling of a Scottish castle. Sometimes the roof at night, where Clark would fly and Harry would sit on the edge and watch him and think. He was thinking about power. Not Voldemort's version of it, not even Clark's version, something more personal, something about what it meant to be what Harry was. He told Voldemort in the mirror room that fear was information, and he'd believed it, and he still believed it. But sitting on the Metropolis rooftop watching his father loop over the city lights in the long summer dark, Harry thought, what is power to me, not strength? He had some more than a baseline human, less than Clark, exactly as much as 11 years of proximity to a Kryptonian had given him, which was real and not nothing and not the point. Not magic, he had that too, and it was deep and old and getting clearer and stronger as he understood it better, and it was not the point either. The point, he thought, was choice. The consistent, daily, low-drama choice to use what you had in service of something larger than what you wanted. His mother had made that choice at the end of her life in a single terrible moment. His father made it every day, in 1,000 small ways and a handful of enormous ones. Harry was going to make it too, not because he'd been told to, not because a prophecy described him as the vehicle for it, but because he'd seen what it looked like when someone did and understood, bone deep, that it was worth doing. Clark landed beside him on the rooftop edge, settling with the ease of someone for whom landing was as natural as walking. He looked out at the city for a moment. What are you thinking about? Clark asked. Power, Harry said. Big topic, Clark said. I know. Harry looked at the city below, the grid of streets, the lit windows, the ongoing motion of a city that never quite stopped. He asked me why I wasn't afraid of him. Voldemort. You told me, Clark said. I told him what I thought, Harry said, but I've been thinking about the fuller answer. He turned to look at his father. Fear assumes that the worst outcome is losing. But losing isn't, it isn't nothing, it's bad, but it's not the worst thing. The worst thing is becoming something less than yourself in order to avoid it. He paused. That's what Voldemort did. He was so afraid of death that he unmade everything in himself that was worth keeping alive. Clark was very still beside him, looking at Harry with the full attention thing. You taught me that, Harry said. Not in words specifically, in how you are. Every day being Clark Kent who helps people, not Superman who could control them. That's the lesson. Clark was quiet for long enough that Harry looked at him to check. Clark's face was doing the contain thing, the large things compressed small, the jaw, the eyes. I didn't know if I was getting it right, Clark said finally. You were, Harry said. I'm not your father biologically. I didn't know what I was doing most of the time. I read books and called my mother and tried to. Dad, Harry said. Clark looked at him. You got it right, Harry said. That's not an opinion, it's the evidence. He held his father's gaze steadily. Voldemort met me and couldn't understand me. He couldn't process what I was because it didn't fit any category he had, and the reason I don't fit his categories is you. Clark looked at his son, this boy who had arrived in a pod in the Scottish Highlands, and grabbed his finger and talked to the Sorting Hat and faced down the remnants of a dark wizard at 11 years old with nothing but clear eyes and the things his father had taught him, and stopped trying to contain the large things. Come here, he said. Harry went. Clark's arm around his shoulders, solid and certain, and the Metropolis skyline spread before them both, and for a while neither of them needed to say anything because the important things had already been said. 3 weeks into July, a letter arrived. Not by owl, by a small bird Harry didn't recognize, iridescent blue, which delivered its letter and then sat on the kitchen windowsill eating a grape with extreme contentment. The letter was on cream parchment in Dumbledore's handwriting, which was the elaborate copperplate of someone who had learned to write in a different century and saw no reason to modernize. Dear Harry, I am writing with several purposes, of which I will address the most practical first. The Philosopher's Stone has been destroyed. Nicholas Flamel has decided to discontinue his use of the elixir, which means Voldemort cannot benefit from it now or in future. That particular avenue is closed. I am also writing to tell you that I have spent considerable time since your visit to my office, both in January and our conversation in June, thinking about the way I have conducted this war. I have been thinking particularly about the difference between wisdom and control. I have often mistaken the second for the first. You will need to know, before next year, that there is a diary, one of Tom Riddle's from his time as a student. I believe it may be a Horcrux, though I cannot confirm this without further investigation. I am telling you this not because I need you to act on it, but because I have made a promise to keep you informed, and I intend to keep it. Your friend Ron will be receiving something next year that may bring this closer to a confrontation sooner than I would like. I will do what I can to prevent it, but Lucius Malfoy is not fully predictable when he believes himself to be safe. One more thing. Fawkes has asked, in the way that Fawkes asks for things, to send you something. There was a feather in the envelope. Phoenix, golden red, about 8 inches long, warm to the touch even through the paper. He doesn't do this, Dumbledore had written in smaller text below, as I mentioned. He seems to feel that you are owed something. With respect and, I hope, growing honesty, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he held the feather up to the window light, and it caught the sun and threw it back in long warm filaments, and he thought about a bird that was made of fire and could not be permanently killed, that burned and came back, that chose to give this. He put the feather carefully in the drawer with his father's letters and Lily Potter's photograph. He went to find Clark. His father was in the study, not reading, just sitting, which was unusual enough that Harry paused in the doorway. Clark was looking at nothing, hands clasped, doing the thing he sometimes did where he listened to the city in a general way, not tracking anything specific, just present with the sound of it. Dumbledore wrote, Harry said. Clark looked up. Good news or complicated news? Both, Harry said, and sat in the chair across from his father and told him about the diary and Lucius Malfoy and what next year was shaping up to be. Clark listened. Asked 3 questions, all of them exact. What's the timeline? What does Dumbledore need from you? What do you need from me? September to June, Harry said. Whatever the diary does, it'll be at school. He needs me to be ready and to trust him to be working it from his end. And he stopped, working out what was actually true. I need to know you're there, not here specifically, just there, that if I write, you'll write back. That if something goes sideways, I can tell you. Always, Clark said with the simplicity of someone stating a physical law. And I need you to trust me, Harry said, to handle what's mine to handle. Clark looked at his son, the jaw thing but softer this time. I've been trusting you since September, he said. I'll keep trusting you, Harry nodded. Okay, but Harry, Clark said. Harry looked at him. Trusting you to handle what's yours doesn't mean you handle it alone, Clark said. Ron and Hermione are, I know, Harry said. They're non-negotiable. Good, Clark said. Alone is not a strategy. It's a feeling dressed up as one, Harry smiled. That's going in a letter to Hermione. She'll use it on you immediately, Clark said. Definitely, Harry agreed and smiled wider. Worth it. The last week of August had the particular quality of the end of a long day, everything done that needed doing, the good tiredness of a summer fully used. Harry had read 14 books, 2 of them wizarding theory, and the rest a mixture of history and fiction, and one very good biography of a Muggle physicist that Clark had recommended, and that turned out to be relevant to magical theory, in ways that Harry was now writing out systematically for Hermione. He'd corresponded with Hermione extensively, Ron periodically, Neville once in a while, and Dumbledore 3 times, each exchange more like a real conversation than the one before. He'd drafted and redrafted a letter to Draco Malfoy and eventually not sent it, on the grounds that some things needed to be said in person. He'd spent time with his grandmother in Smallville, which was always its own kind of reset, Martha Kent's farm, the particular smell of Kansas in late summer, the absolute straightforward goodness of the woman who had raised Clark and who treated Harry with the uncomplicated warmth of someone who considered him unambiguously hers. She taught him 2 new recipes, told him stories about Clark at 11 that Clark would have preferred she didn't, and sent him home with a jar of preserves and the instruction to eat something green every day. He'd gone flying with Clark 4 times, not on a broom, the real kind, Clark's kind, held against his father's side in the upper air above Metropolis, where the sound of the city faded to background and the stars were clear. He didn't do this anymore as often as he had when he was small, because he was growing into his own, and that was as it should be. But he did it 4 times this summer, and each time he put his face into the wind and spread his arms and felt what it was to be above everything, and remembered what it was his father did every day and what that meant. The night before the train, they sat on the roof again. Clark had got takeout, Thai, Harry's choice, and they ate with the city below and the last of the summer above, and Harry had the feeling, sharp and good, of a thing completing before a next thing began. "I've been thinking about what you are," Clark said partway through. Harry looked at him. "Not in the way that worries me," Clark clarified, "in the way that I don't think there's a word for it yet." "What you are?" He looked at Harry carefully. "You're a wizard raised by a Kryptonian, which means you understand power from the inside in a way that wizards don't, and you understand magic from the inside in a way that I still don't entirely. You're both things without being half of either." He paused. "That's rare. In my experience, things that are genuinely new are rare." "And," Harry said, "and it's going to keep mattering," Clark said, "this year, next year, after. People are going to keep trying to put you in a category. The wizarding world has chosen one, and the non-magical world would have something else if they knew, and none of those categories fit." He looked at Harry directly. "Don't let them." "I know," Harry said. "You know now," Clark said. "It gets harder when you're tired, when it's been a long year and someone offers you a category that fits well enough." Harry thought about this. "Like the prophecy," he said, "when it would be easier to just be what it says." "Exactly like that," Clark said. Harry nodded slowly. "I hear you." "Good," Clark said. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment. The city did what it always did. Somewhere below, someone was playing music loud enough to carry, something warm and brass-heavy, jazz maybe, drifting up on the August air. "Dad," Harry said, "what was it like when you found me?" Clark was quiet for a moment. Harry had asked variations of this before, at various ages, and each time Clark had answered the version of it appropriate to where Harry was. Now Harry was 12 and 2 months, had stood in front of Voldemort, had pushed the remnants of a dark wizard out of a room with his mother's love and his father's teaching, and was about to go back and do whatever came next. "Cold," Clark said. "Scottish October. I was in the Highlands to be quiet for a while." He looked at his hands. "The pod came down and I thought it was something that needed dealing with, a problem to solve." He paused. "And then I opened it and you were there, 10 months old. You smiled at me. I didn't know better," Harry said. "No," Clark agreed. "You just saw someone and decided it was fine." He looked at Harry. "That's always been you, actually. You look at things and decide what they are and proceed accordingly. You were doing it at 10 months. Harry thought about Voldemort in the mirror room looking at Harry and not understanding what he was seeing. He thought about Dumbledore recalibrating in real time. He thought about Draco Malfoy on the train trying to work out what category applied. He thought about himself at 10 months, grabbing Clark's finger in a cold Scottish clearing. "Bah," Harry said. Clark looked at him. "That's what I said," Harry said. "Apparently, according to you." Clark laughed. "The real one, the one that was entirely himself, unheld, warm and whole." "Yeah," he said. "You did." "Well," Harry said, "it still seems like the right response." "To what?" "To most things," Harry said. He looked at the city below, at the lights spreading out to the horizon and the dark sky above. "Finding out you're a wizard. Finding out you survived a dark wizard as a baby. Finding out there are 6 more Horcruxes and next year is going to be complicated." He paused. "Bah, bah," Clark agreed. They sat until the music faded. Until the takeout was gone and the city went through its midnight cycle and the stars did what stars did. And then they went inside and Harry packed his trunk for the second time, and in the morning they went to King's Cross together. At the barrier this time it was different. Harry stood with his trunk and his owl ready and Clark stood beside him with his hands in his pockets, and it was easier than last year. Not because it didn't matter, it mattered more, if anything. But because they both knew now what the year was and what it would ask, and they'd talked about all of it, and the talking had done what it was supposed to do. More often, Clark said. More often, Harry agreed. And if something, I'll tell you, Harry said. Immediately, Clark nodded. I'll be fine, Harry said. You'll be extraordinary, Clark said, not a comfort, an assessment. Harry looked at his father, tall, certain, wearing the Clark Kent costume with the ease of someone who'd long since stopped distinguishing between the costume and the man because there was no distinction to make. Mild-mannered reporter from Metropolis, most powerful being on Earth. The man who'd opened a pod in a cold field and not walked away. I love you, Dad, Harry said. Clark's jaw, just for a moment. Then, I love you too, kid, go. Harry went through the barrier. The platform was the same, scarlet engine, steam, crowd, chaos, the smell of coal smoke and magic and possibility. Ron waved from 20 feet away with the particular enthusiasm of someone who'd spent 2 months with Fred and George and was ready to be around people who didn't put anything in his food. Hermione was already at the train with her trunk neatly organized and her expression bright and prepared. Harry walked toward them. Behind him, through the barrier, he knew his father was turning to walk back through King's Cross, hands in pockets, unhurried, carrying the full weight of knowing exactly where Harry was going and what was waiting and choosing, today as every day, to let his son fly. Harry would write tonight. He'd write about the platform and the train and whatever Hermione had found during the summer that she was going to present before they crossed the Scottish border. He'd write more often, as promised. He'd tell his father everything, as always, but first Hogwarts, second year, a diary and a Malfoy, and whatever came next in the long, imperfect, necessary work of stopping Tom Riddle for good. Harry Kent stepped onto the Hogwarts Express. The train began to move, and the next year, with all of it, began.